Welcome to another story on Cheating Tales Lab. We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. Zephyr Blackwood's keys jangled as he fumbled with the lock. A bouquet of blue orchids cradled in one arm and a small velvet box tucked securely in his pocket. The house was unnaturally quiet as he stepped inside, the silence pressing against his ears like a physical force. "Lyra," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. No answer. Something was off. Zephyr's eyes darted around, taking in the subtle signs of disturbance. A photo frame lay face down on the side table, its usual place marred by its absence. As he moved further into the house, the wrongness intensified. In the kitchen, Lyra's favorite mug lay shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered like fallen stars. Her purse sat abandoned on the counter, its contents undisturbed. The orchids suddenly felt heavy in his hands, their delicate petals a mockery of the celebration he'd anticipated. Zephyr's heart raced as he made his way to the living room. Lyra's phone rested on the coffee table, its screen a web of cracks. He picked it up gingerly, as if it might bite him. The cracks spread outward from the center, like the tendrils of a sinister conspiracy reaching into his life. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his own phone and dialed Iris Zhao's number. Lyra's best friend picked up on the third ring, her voice pitched oddly high. "Hello? Zephyr? Iris, have you seen Lyra? She's not home, and things look strange." There was a pause, too long to be natural. "And no, I haven't seen her. Is everything okay?" Zephyr's suspicion grew with each stuttered word. Iris was hiding something, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of whatever secret she was keeping. "Are you sure? You haven't heard from her at all?" "I'm sorry, Zephyr. I really don't know where she is." The words tumbled out too quickly, each one another brick in the wall of deception. After hanging up, Zephyr found himself in their bedroom, drawn there by some instinct he couldn't name. His eyes fell on Lyra's jewelry box, an ornate wooden thing they bought on their honeymoon. Something niggled at the back of his mind. He opened it, fingers tracing the familiar contours. Then he paused. Was that a seam where there shouldn't be one? Pressing gently, he felt a click, and a false bottom sprang open. Inside lay a burner phone, its cheap plastic a stark contrast to Lyra's elegant jewelry. Zephyr's hand shook as he turned it on. The messages that filled the screen were in a code he didn't recognize, a fact that chilled him to the bone. He was a top cryptographer, for God's sake. If he couldn't crack it at a glance. The shrill ring of his phone cut through his thoughts like a knife. Detective Nolan Frost's gruff voice filled his ear before he could even say hello. "Mr. Blackwood, we found your wife barely alive in a motel. You need to come now." The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the dresser. "What happened? Is she—" "Just get here," Frost interrupted, his tone grim. "There's more to this than meets the eye." As Zephyr rushed out the door, the velvet box fell from his pocket forgotten. The sapphire necklace inside glinted in the fading light, a testament to the love he thought he knew. The Starlight Motel loomed before Zephyr, its neon sign flickering weakly in the twilight. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt rubber and gasoline, a pungent cocktail that made his stomach churn. Police cars formed a barrier around the scene, their lights painting the world in alternating flashes of red and blue. An ambulance stood nearby, its back doors open like the maw of some patient beast. And there, wrapped around a lamppost like some grotesque modern art installation, was a mangled red Porsche. Detective Frost materialized out of the chaos, his weathered face a mask of grim determination. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, nodding in greeting. "Your wife was in an accident with Caspian Vex, her ex from college. He was driving under the influence." Zephyr's mind reeled. Caspian Vex? Lyra had never mentioned him. Frost's next words hit even harder. "But there's more to this than meets the eye, Mr. Blackwood." Before Zephyr could press for details, movement caught his eye. Paramedics were wheeling out a stretcher, and on it lay Lyra. Her face was pale, marred by ugly bruises that stood out like accusatory fingers pointing at some unseen culprit. Their eyes met across the chaos of the crime scene. Lyra reached out weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, I'm so sorry. It was an accident." The words seemed to carry a weight beyond their simple meaning, laden with secrets and lies. Zephyr turned away, unable to bear the sight of her. His gaze fell on a briefcase among the scattered debris, its contents spilling out onto the asphalt. He caught glimpses of what looked like classified documents before a uniformed officer hurried to gather them up. As he made his way back to his car, a hushed conversation between two paramedics reached his ears. "Did you see those badges? High-level clearance, man." "Yeah, and those encrypted hard drives? What the hell were they doing here?" Zephyr's mind whirled, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to take shape. What had Lyra gotten herself into? And more importantly, what had she dragged him into along with her? The sterile corridors of the National Cyber Defense Agency headquarters seemed colder than usual as Zephyr made his way to his office. The events of the past few hours had left him feeling like a stranger in his own life. With practiced ease, he bypassed the standard security protocols and accessed the agency's personnel files. His fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for a name he'd never thought he'd need to know. Caspian Vex. There it was. Hired 3 months ago as a cybersecurity consultant. Zephyr's eyes narrowed. It was a vague title, the kind used when someone needed access but didn't want to draw attention. Red flags unfurled in his mind, each one a warning he'd failed to heed. Burning the midnight oil? Zephyr nearly jumped out of his skin. Raven Coe stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in his disheveled appearance and the classified files on his screen. "Raven, He hesitated, weighing his options. Then, making a decision, he gestured for her to come in. "I need your help, but this stays between us." In a secure room, away from prying eyes and ears, Zephyr laid out the situation. Raven listened, her brilliant mind already connecting dots he hadn't even seen. "We need to look at the access logs," she said, her fingers dancing across a keyboard. "If what you're saying is true, there should be a pattern." Hours passed in a blur of code and caffeine. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, they had their answer. A series of minor but strategic security breaches over the past 6 months, all traced back to Zephyr's credentials. But the timestamps. "I wasn't even in the building for some of these," Zephyr muttered. Raven's voice was grim. "Someone's been using your access, and doing a damn good job of covering their tracks." They dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through the labyrinth of the agency's systems. And then they found it. Fragmented connections between Caspian Vex and chatter about a group known as the Cypher Syndicate on the dark web. "I've heard whispers about them," Raven said, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "They're planning something big, a cyber attack that could cripple entire nations." The implications hit Zephyr like a physical blow. Lyra had been using their marriage as a cover, feeding classified information to the Cypher Syndicate through Caspian. But why? What could possibly drive her to betray not just him, but their entire nation? With trembling hands, he pulled out the burner phone he'd found in Lyra's jewelry box. The encrypted messages that had baffled him earlier now seemed to mock him with their secrets. "Can you break this?" he asked Raven, handing her the phone. Her eyes lit up with the challenge. "Give me an hour." 53 minutes later, Raven's triumphant cry broke the tense silence. "I'm in." Zephyr leaned over her shoulder, his heart pounding. As the decrypted messages filled the screen, he felt the last remnants of his world crumble around him. Lyra wasn't just having an affair or stealing information. She was a deep-cover operative for the Cypher Syndicate, planted years ago to infiltrate the agency through him. Their entire relationship, their marriage, their life together, it had all been a lie. As the weight of the betrayal crashed over him, Zephyr gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. He'd thought he was living a love story. Instead, he'd been an unwitting pawn in a game of international espionage. And now, it was time to change the rules. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor assaulted Zephyr's nostrils as he made his way to Lyra's room. A manila envelope containing divorce papers was tucked under his arm, its weight a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered his world. Room 307. Zephyr paused at the door, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He pushed it open, the hinges squeaking softly as if protesting the intrusion. The sterile whiteness of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the warmth their home once held. Lyra lay in the bed, looking small and vulnerable in her hospital gown. Her eyes widened as she saw him, a mix of emotions flashing across her face. Relief, fear, and something else Zephyr couldn't quite place. "Zephyr," she began, her voice cracking. "I can explain." He cut her off with a raised hand, his face an impassive mask. Without a word, he placed a manila envelope on her bedside table. The soft thud it made seemed to echo in the silence of the room. Lyra's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to Zephyr. Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by panic. "Please, just let me." The door opened again, cutting off her plea. Caspian Vex sauntered in, his arm in a sling and a nasty gash running across his forehead. The smug grin on his face faltered slightly as he registered Zephyr's presence. "Well, well," Caspian drawled, recovering quickly. "If it isn't the man of the hour." Zephyr's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Caspian's next words hit like a sledgehammer. "I suppose introductions are in order. Zephyr Blackwood. Meet Lyra's handler in the Cipher Syndicate." "Oh, wait, that's me." Lyra's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Zephyr's mind raced, processing this new information. He'd suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed so brazenly. "What do you want?" Zephyr managed to grit out, his voice low and dangerous. Caspian's smirk widened. "Straight to business. I like that." He lowered himself into a chair, wincing slightly as the movement jostled his injured arm. "We want your cooperation, Zephyr. Your expertise, your access. In return, we don't expose certain indiscretions from your past." Zephyr's blood ran cold. How could they possibly know about... "That's right," Caspian continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Lyra here discovered a rather interesting ethical breach from your early days at the agency. Wouldn't want that getting out, would we?" Zephyr's face remained impassive, but his mind was working overtime. He needed time, needed to think. I need some time to consider this," he said, allowing a hint of vulnerability to creep into his voice. Caspian nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Take all the time you need. We'll be in touch." As Zephyr turned to leave, his hand brushed against the get-well card in his pocket. In one smooth motion, he placed it on Lyra's bedside table, right next to the divorce papers. The high-tech listening device hidden within would pick up every word spoken in this room. With a final, inscrutable look at Lyra, Zephyr walked out, the first step of his counter-strategy set in motion. The game was on, and he intended to win. Artemis Steele's office was a fortress within a fortress. Zephyr had been here countless times before, but never like this. Never with the weight of betrayal and conspiracy hanging over his head. Director Steele herself was a formidable presence, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce right through him as he laid out everything he'd uncovered. The burner phone, the security breaches, the Cipher Syndicate, Lyra's true identity. He held nothing back. As he finished his report, Steele leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Finally, she spoke. "This goes deeper than we ever imagined." Her eyes narrowed as she absorbed the information. "We need to turn this to our advantage." Zephyr nodded, relieved that she believed him. "What do you suggest, Director?" A slow, predatory smile spread across Steele's face. "We make you a double agent, Mr. Blackwood. Feed false information to Lyra and Caspian. Use them to unravel the entire Cipher Syndicate operation from the inside out." The plan was daring, dangerous, and exactly what Zephyr had hoped for. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Zephyr lived a precarious double life. To Lyra and Caspian, he appeared to be a reluctant accomplice, sharing carefully selected tidbits of classified information. Each piece of data was meticulously crafted misinformation, designed to mislead the Cypher Syndicate while appearing valuable on the surface. Lyra, now out of the hospital, watched him with a mix of suspicion and hope. Zephyr played his part to perfection, allowing just enough reluctance and resentment to show through to make his cooperation believable. Caspian, for his part, seemed to revel in his perceived victory. His smug grins and condescending pats on the back made Zephyr's skin crawl, but he endured it all for the sake of the mission. One night, as Zephyr sat in his darkened living room, monitoring the feed from the listening device he'd planted in Lyra's hospital room, he overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. "Everything's going according to plan." Lyra's voice came through, tinny but clear. "Zephyr's cooperating, just like you said he would." "Good," a gruff male voice replied. Zephyr's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. Detective Nolan Frost. "Keep him in line. We can't afford any slip-ups this close to the endgame." Zephyr's mind reeled. Detective Frost, the man in charge of investigating the motel incident, was on the Cypher Syndicate's payroll. The conspiracy ran deeper than he had ever imagined. As the days wore on, the toll of his deception began to show. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. His movements became jittery and unpredictable. Raven, ever observant, couldn't help but notice. "Zephyr," she said one day, cornering him in a secure room at the NCDA. "What's going on with you? And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you better than that." For a moment, Zephyr considered brushing her off, but the concern in her eyes, the genuine worry in her voice, broke through his defenses. In a moment of vulnerability, he found himself confiding in her about the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "I feel like I'm losing myself," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every lie, every piece of false information I feed them, it's like I'm chipping away at who I am." Raven listened silently, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of his emotions. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "You're not losing yourself," she said firmly. "You're fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. That's who you are, Zephyr. Don't ever forget that." Her words, simple yet powerful, gave Zephyr the strength to continue. As he navigated this treacherous path, Raven's support became his lifeline, a reminder of why he was fighting in the first place. The abandoned subway station loomed before Zephyr, its entrance a gaping maw in the side of a decrepit building. Graffiti covered every available surface, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay and neglect. Zephyr adjusted his glasses, ensuring the hidden camera was in place. The live stream to the secure NCDA server was already running, capturing every detail of this clandestine meeting with the Cypher Syndicate leaders. As he descended into the bowels of the station, the dank atmosphere closed in around him. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of dripping water echoed ominously in the distance. The Syndicate members were already gathered, their faces partially obscured by the poor lighting. Zephyr recognized Caspian and Lyra among them, along with a few others he'd seen in surveillance photos. As the meeting progressed, Zephyr's blood ran cold. The Syndicate's ultimate plan was far more ambitious and devastating than anyone had anticipated. They intended to crash the global financial market using stolen algorithms, creating worldwide economic chaos on an unprecedented scale. Zephyr kept his face impassive as he absorbed this information, but inside, his mind was racing. The implications were staggering. Millions of lives would be affected, entire nations brought to their knees. He knew then that the stakes of his mission had just been raised exponentially. In the days that followed, Lyra made several attempts to rekindle their relationship. Her touches, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt like poison on Zephyr's skin. Her words of love and regret rang hollow in his ears. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered one night, her hand on his arm. You have to believe me, Zephyr. Everything I've done, it was for a greater cause. Zephyr played along, forcing himself to respond with just the right mix of hesitation and lingering affection. All the while, he documented every interaction, building a case that would eventually bring the entire syndicate crashing down. Caspian, meanwhile, grew increasingly paranoid. Zephyr often caught him watching with narrowed eyes, as if trying to peer into his very thoughts. I want round-the-clock surveillance on Blackwood, Caspian barked at one of his underlings. If he so much as sneezes, I want to know about it. This new level of scrutiny complicated Zephyr's covert activities. Communication with Director Steele and Raven became a dangerous game of cat and mouse. He found himself employing ever more creative methods to pass along crucial information without detection. Late one night, as Zephyr was in the middle of transmitting a particularly sensitive piece of intel to Director Steele, disaster nearly struck. The door to his office began to open, the handle turning agonizingly slowly. Zephyr's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to hide the evidence of his true allegiance. Just as the door swung open, revealing one of Caspian's men, Raven's voice came through on the intercom. Zephyr, I need you in the lab right away. We've got a situation with the firewall. The syndicate member hesitated, then grudgingly allowed Zephyr to leave. As he hurried down the corridor, Zephyr sent a silent thank you to Raven for her perfectly timed intervention. Later, as he pored over some of the syndicate's encrypted communications, Zephyr made a chilling discovery. Hidden within the complex codes and ciphers was evidence suggesting that the Cipher Syndicate had infiltrated the highest levels of government. But it was the next revelation that truly shook him to his core. As he dug deeper, following a trail of digital breadcrumbs, he uncovered something that made his blood run cold. The evidence pointed to a mole within the upper echelons of the NCDA itself. Zephyr sat back in his chair, his mind reeling from the implications. The enemy wasn't just out there. It was here, within the very walls he'd sworn to protect. As he stared at the damning evidence on his screen, one thought echoed through his mind. Who could he trust now? The air in the NCDA's secure conference room crackled with tension. Zephyr Blackwood stood at the head of the table, his eyes hard as flint as he surveyed the small group of trusted operatives before him. Director Artemis Steele sat to his right, her face an impassive mask that betrayed nothing of the high-stakes game they were about to play. Ladies and gentlemen, Zephyr began, his voice low and steady, what I'm about to propose is not only dangerous but technically illegal. If anyone wants to leave now, there will be no repercussions. No one moved. Zephyr nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Good. Let's begin. Over the next hour, Zephyr laid out the bones of an elaborate sting operation. The centerpiece? A fictitious quantum encryption server that would supposedly house the world's most sensitive financial data. We're going to create a honeypot so sweet the Cipher Syndicate won't be able to resist, Zephyr explained, his fingers dancing across a holographic display as he spoke. This server will be our bait, our trap, and our key to bringing down the entire operation. Director Steele leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. And how do you propose we leak this information without arousing suspicion? Zephyr's smile was cold. Through me. I'll feed the information to Lyra and Caspian, bit by tantalizing bit. They think they have me under their thumb. It's time we use that to our advantage. As the meeting progressed, the plan took shape. Carefully controlled leaks, strategically placed vulnerabilities, all designed to draw the Cipher Syndicate into a trap of the NCDA's making. Over the next few weeks, Zephyr became a master of misdirection. Every conversation with Lyra, every clandestine meeting with Caspian, became an opportunity to drop hints about the quantum encryption server. I overheard something interesting today, Zephyr would say, his voice carefully modulated to sound both nervous and excited. A new server, supposed to be unhackable. It's got everyone at the agency on edge. He watched as the bait was taken, hook, line, and sinker. The Cipher Syndicate mobilized their most skilled hackers, pouring resources into cracking what they believed to be the ultimate prize. Zephyr stood in the shadows of the NCDA's main server room, watching as technicians scurried about, setting up the elaborate ruse. Fake servers hummed, their blinking lights a testament to the agency's attention to detail. Everything had to be perfect. The slightest inconsistency could blow the entire operation. As he observed the controlled chaos, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Zephyr. He turned to see Lyra approaching, Caspian close behind. Their faces were masks of determination and barely concealed greed. "We need access to the server room," Lyra said, her voice low and urgent. "The quantum encryption server. You're going to get us in." Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the endgame. He nodded slowly, playing the part of the reluctant accomplice to perfection. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But after this, we're done. I want out." Caspian's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Oh, Zephyr, you're in this for the long haul now. There's no getting out." As Zephyr led them towards the heart of the trap, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Something was off. The syndicate's movement seemed too precise, too well-informed. It was as if they knew exactly where to step to avoid the NCDA's carefully laid snares. A chilling realization struck him like a physical blow. There was a mole on his team. Someone privy to the details of the sting operation was feeding information to the syndicate. As he punched in the access code to the server room, Zephyr's mind raced. The trap was sprung, but who was really caught in its jaws? He had mere moments to identify the traitor and salvage the operation before everything fell apart. The heavy door swung open with a soft hiss, revealing the blinking lights and humming servers within. As Lyra and Caspian stepped eagerly into the room, Zephyr's hand hovered over the concealed panic button in his pocket. One press, and the entire building would go into lockdown. But before he could act, a voice from behind froze him in his tracks. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Blackwood." Zephyr turned slowly, his blood running cold as he recognized the speaker. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place, revealing a picture far more twisted than he could have imagined. The server room, once a sanctuary of order and control, had become a battleground. Zephyr's mind raced, processing the unfolding chaos with the cold precision of the master cryptographer he was. The syndicate's uncanny knowledge of their countermeasures suddenly made horrifying sense. Zephyr's eyes darted around the room, cataloging every face, every micro-expression. The mole was here, in this very room. But who? A bead of sweat trickled down his spine as he realized the magnitude of the situation. The entire operation was unraveling faster than he could patch the holes. He was going to have to improvise, relying on years of experience and the razor-sharp instincts honed through countless cyber battles. "Impressive setup, Zephyr." Caspian's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "Almost had us fooled. Almost." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes cold and calculating. Gone was the vulnerability she'd shown in the hospital. This was the real Lyra, the deep-cover operative who had played him for years. "Did you really think we wouldn't see through your little charade?" she asked, her voice like silk over steel. Zephyr's retort died on his lips as a new figure entered the fray. Detective Nolan Frost sauntered into the server room, a predatory grin on his weathered face. "Surprised to see me, Blackwood?" Frost chuckled. "You should have dug a little deeper into that motel incident. Might have saved you some trouble." The trio converged on Zephyr, backing him against the humming servers. They thought they had won, their victory assured by treachery and deceit. But Zephyr Blackwood was far from beaten. "You're right," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I should have dug deeper. Into all of you." With a swift motion, Zephyr pulled out a small device from his pocket. The syndicate members tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, a holographic display flickered to life, filling the air with streams of data. "What you're seeing," Zephyr explained, his confidence growing with each word, "is every piece of intelligence I've gathered on the Cypher Syndicate over the past weeks. Every conversation, every transaction, every dirty little secret. Caspian's face drained of color. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. Frost's hand inched towards his concealed weapon. The real sting operation, Zephyr continued, was layers deep. This server room, it's a sophisticated containment system. The moment you stepped inside, you activated a dormant protocol. We're locked in, and every word you say is being recorded and transmitted to law enforcement agencies worldwide. The realization of their predicament dawned on the syndicate members' faces. They had walked right into a trap far more intricate than they could have imagined. Lyra, ever the quick thinker, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Her face softened, tears welling up in her eyes. "Zephyr, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "What we had, it wasn't all a lie. I grew to love you. Truly. We can still have a life together. Just give me a chance to explain." For a moment, just a fleeting instant, Zephyr's resolve wavered. The memory of happier times, of a love he thought was real, threatened to overwhelm him. But then he remembered the betrayal, the years of lies, the lives put at risk for the syndicate's twisted ambitions. His expression hardened. "No, Lyra," he said, his voice cold. "We can't." With a subtle hand motion, Zephyr activated the final phase of his countermove. Alarms blared throughout the building as armed NCDA agents began to swarm towards their location. Panic erupted in the server room. Caspian lunged for the door, only to find it sealed shut. Frost drew his weapon, his eyes darting wildly for an escape route. Lyra stood frozen, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. In the chaos, the three managed to slip past Zephyr, making a break for the emergency stairwell. They disappeared through the door, just as the first NCDA agents rounded the corner. Zephyr gave chase, his intimate knowledge of the building's layout guiding his pursuit. The hunt was on, and he was determined to see it through to the bitter end. Rain lashed against the windows of the NCDA headquarters as Zephyr tore through the labyrinthine corridors. His footsteps echoed off the sterile walls, mingling with the distant shouts of agents and the wail of alarms. He could hear them ahead, Lyra, Caspian, and Frost, their desperation palpable in the frantic pounding of their feet. But Zephyr had the home field advantage. He'd walked these halls countless times, knew every shortcut and hidden passage. As they approached a T-junction, Zephyr cut left, taking a maintenance corridor that would bring him out ahead of the fleeing trio. He burst through a door just as they rounded the corner, nearly colliding with Caspian. The look of shock on their faces was almost comical. Almost. "End of the line," Zephyr panted, blocking their path. Frost raised his weapon, but Lyra pushed his arm down. "No, there's still a way out. The roof." They turned and ran, leaving Zephyr to give chase once more. Up they went, flight after flight of stairs, the storm growing louder with each floor they climbed. Finally, they burst onto the roof. The rain came down in sheets, drenching them instantly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark, electric blue. Lyra spun to face Zephyr, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild. "Zephyr, please," she shouted over the howling wind. "You have to listen to me. I'm pregnant. It's yours." The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. He faltered, his mind reeling. Could it be true? After everything, could there be an innocent life caught in the crossfire of their deception? Caspian seized the moment of distraction. "Enough of this shit," he snarled, pulling out a small remote. With the press of a button, the whir of rotors cut through the storm. A helicopter rose into view, hovering at the edge of the roof. Their escape route. "It's over, Zephyr," Frost called out, already moving towards a chopper. "You lost. Accept it." But Zephyr wasn't done. Not by a long shot. As Lyra and Caspian made for the helicopter, Zephyr reached into his pocket and activated a device of his own. To anyone watching, it would have looked like he was simply letting them go. They didn't know that every word spoken in that helicopter would be broadcast to law enforcement agencies worldwide. Their escape vehicle had become a flying confession booth. Zephyr stood in the rain, watching as the helicopter lifted off into the stormy night. Water streamed down his face, indistinguishable from the tears he refused to acknowledge. A hand on his shoulder startled him. He turned to see Director Steele, her usually immaculate suit soaked through, her eyes glinting with a fierce pride. "It's done," Zephyr said, his voice barely audible over the fading sound of rotors. "They thought they could use me, betray me, and walk away. But they underestimated what I'm capable of. This is the price of their deceit." Steele nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you inside. There's still work to be done." As they turned to leave the roof, Zephyr cast one last look at the storm-tossed sky. The helicopter was gone, swallowed by the night. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where the echoes of betrayal would resound through the digital realm, changing the landscape of cybersecurity forever. With a deep breath, Zephyr squared his shoulders and followed Steele back into the building. The storm raged on, but within him, a calm had settled. He had faced his betrayers, confronted his past, and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. The war against the Cypher Syndicate was far from over, but tonight, Zephyr Blackwood had struck a decisive blow, and he would not rest until the last echoes of their betrayal had been silenced. The federal courthouse loomed before Zephyr Blackwood, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the gravity of the proceedings about to unfold within. 2 months had passed since that rain-soaked confrontation on the NCDA rooftop, but the weight of those events still pressed heavily upon his shoulders. As he ascended the steps, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Zephyr kept his gaze forward, his face an impassive mask. He was the star witness in the trial against the Cypher Syndicate, and the world was watching. The courtroom fell silent as Zephyr took the stand. His eyes swept across the room, landing on Lyra and Caspian. They sat among the other arrested syndicate members, their prison jumpsuits a far cry from the polished personas they once projected. Lyra's gaze met his, a mixture of defiance and something else, regret perhaps? Caspian, on the other hand, glared with undisguised hatred. Over the next several days, Zephyr's testimony unfolded like a complex algorithm. He presented decrypted communications, detailed financial trails, and played the damning confessions recorded from the rig helicopter. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the syndicate's coffin, exposing the full extent of their operations. The media dubbed it the trial of the century. Zephyr's dual role as victim and hero captivated the public imagination. Despite the intense pressure and scrutiny, he remained composed, his testimony clear and unwavering. During a recess, Zephyr found himself alone in a private chamber, his mind still racing from the morning's cross-examination. The door opened, and Lyra was escorted in by a guard. Her eyes, once so familiar, now seemed to belong to a stranger. "Zephyr," she began, her voice soft, "I know you probably won't believe me, but I need you to know. What I told you on the roof about being pregnant, it wasn't entirely a lie. I thought I was at the time." Zephyr's face remained impassive. "I know the truth, Lyra. I saw your medical records from the hospital after the crash. You were never pregnant." The color drained from Lyra's face as she realized her final deception had been unraveled before it even began. Without another word, she was led away, leaving Zephyr alone with the echoes of her lies. When the verdict finally came down, it fell like a hammer blow. Caspian, identified as a key syndicate operative, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Lyra, despite her attempts to paint herself as a reluctant participant, received 25 years. The syndicate's leader, a shadowy figure finally unmasked, was given a life sentence. In the aftermath of the trial, as the dust began to settle, Zephyr found himself at a crossroads. An offer had been extended, the chance to lead a new international cybersecurity task force. It was an opportunity to be at the forefront of preventing future cyber threats, to turn his painful experience into a force for good. As he pondered the decision, Zephyr found himself standing before the NCDA's memorial wall. A new name had been added since he last visited Raven Coe, his friend and colleague. Fatally wounded while protecting him during the final confrontation with the Syndicate, he placed a hand on her name, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "I'll make it count, Raven," he whispered. "I promise." Weeks later, Zephyr stood before the newly formed International Cyber Defense Coalition in Geneva. As he prepared to address the assembly and accept his new role, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal had nearly broken him, but it had also forged him into someone stronger, someone capable of protecting others from experiencing the same pain. Zephyr stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping across the gathered dignitaries and cybersecurity experts. When he spoke, his voice was steady, filled with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, the digital realm is our new front line. And on this front line, trust is both our greatest vulnerability and our strongest asset. Today, we start building a safer digital future, a future where betrayal cannot hide in the shadows of cyberspace." As his words resonated through the chamber, Zephyr felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He had transformed his personal tragedy into a powerful drive for global cybersecurity. The echoes of betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had become the foundation of a new era of digital defense. In that moment, as he looked out over the faces of those who would join him in this fight, Zephyr Blackwood knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for the future of cyberspace lay ahead, and he was ready to lead the charge. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The soft hum of classical music filled the air, setting a romantic mood in the dimly lit restaurant, its warm glow casting a gentle ambience over the evening. Barbara adjusted her wine glass, tapping her manicured nails lightly against it as she leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Jake across the table. Jake's confident grin widened. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his tailored suit spoke to the authority of a man who was used to taking charge. As head of the marketing department, Jake had the kind of charisma that could command a boardroom and Barbara's heart. Tonight marked a secret anniversary, 6 months since their affair began. For Barbara, every glance, every touch shared across the mahogany table carried a thrilling sense of forbidden excitement. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and mischief as she sipped her wine, savoring both its rich flavor and the intoxicating presence of Jake. Their romance had grown in the midst of office life. Barbara, once diligent and reserved, found herself irresistibly drawn to Jake's magnetic personality during late-night meetings and shared projects. He was everything her husband, David, was not: spontaneous, daring, and capable of making her feel truly alive. David, her husband of 5 years, was steady and reliable, a man who loved her with a quiet devotion and had stood by her through thick and thin. But with Jake, she felt something she hadn't in years: passion, excitement, a spark of electricity that surged through her veins. As she traced the rim of her glass, Barbara's mind briefly wandered to the life she'd left behind for this fleeting passion. David, who had built their life together with patience and sacrifice, was everything she once believed she wanted. But with Jake, there were no routines, no expectations, just stolen moments of wild excitement. Where David offered stability and comfort, Jake represented fire and adrenaline, a contrast that Barbara found herself craving more and more. Her thoughts were pulled back to the present as Jake's voice filled the air. His hand rested lightly on hers, sending a jolt of energy through her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his deep voice soft. Barbara smiled, tilting her head coyly. "Just how lucky I am to be here with you tonight," she replied. Jake grinned, clearly pleased, and raised his glass. "To 6 unforgettable months," he toasted. Barbara echoed him, her voice steady, though inside, a quiet battle raged. She was breaking every rule she once held dear, yet her heart raced with defiance. After all, there was only one life to live, and she wanted it all, rules and morality be damned. Jake leaned in, his fingers gently wrapping around her hand, his dark eyes glinting with mischief. "Are you thinking too much again?" he asked softly. "Maybe you're worried about your husband, David? By the way, how's he doing?" Barbara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, everything's fine. My husband's like any other husband, though he's been a little on edge lately. He visited his parents at their ranch a couple of days ago. Hasn't seen them in a while, and he's especially concerned about his father. He's getting older, and David feels guilty for not visiting more often. Jake raised an intrigued eyebrow. A ranch? I never figured David for the cowboy type. Barbara giggled, a blush creeping across her cheeks. Oh, trust me, David's no cowboy. He's too calm and kind. His personality just doesn't match that kind of spirit. Jake smirked, his voice teasing. A real man should passionately love a woman, take risks, be adventurous. Not some gray worm. His words hung in the air, charged with playful defiance. Then, with a wicked grin, he leaned closer. Now, me, I'm a real man. And after dinner, we're going to have a race, a real love race. Barbara's cheeks flushed deeper, laughter escaping her lips at his audacity. She tilted her head, her voice turning flirtatious as she responded, Is that so? Well, I think I'm up for the challenge. A love race, huh? And what exactly does that involve? Barbara teased, her voice soft as she leaned in closer. Jake leaned forward, his lips just a whisper away from hers. Let's just say it's not for the faint of heart. You'll have to trust me, he murmured, his voice low and confident. Barbara was about to offer a flirtatious reply when their conversation was interrupted by the waiter, who arrived with 2 covered desserts, placing them on the table. Excuse me, Barbara said, furrowing her brows in confusion. We didn't order dessert. The waiter smiled politely, his hands clasped behind his back. It's a gift. Barbara turned her gaze to Jake, her eyes sparkling with both suspicion and delight. Honey, maybe you arranged this surprise? Jake leaned back, a smug smile on his face. Oh, I'm a master of surprises. But come on, ordering dessert? That's way too small for my scale. The waiter chuckled softly and stepped away, leaving the 2 of them to stare at the mysterious desserts before them. Barbara laughed, the tension from earlier melting away. A gift, huh? Maybe the universe is sending us a sign. A little cosmic approval of our arrangement. Jake raised his wine glass, his grin confident. To signs from the universe. They clinked glasses, their laughter blending with the soft hum of the restaurant. The moment felt surreal, perfect, even as if their clandestine relationship was somehow blessed by fate. The atmosphere shifted as Jake reached for the lid of his dessert, lifting it with a flourish. Inside, an elegant piece of chocolate cake was topped with glossy icing, with a joker playing card stuck in the center. Jake tilted his head, a half-smile forming on his lips. What the hell? He muttered, plucking the card from the cake. I don't get it. What kind of stupid joke is this? Barbara, sitting across from him, felt a pang of unease at the sight of the card. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table as she reached for her own dessert. Slowly, she removed the lid, revealing a similar piece of cake. But atop hers was something more, a glint of metal. A cherry impaled on a ring sat perched on top. For a moment, Barbara's breath caught in her throat as her mind jumped to a romantic conclusion. Jake, she said, her voice nervous, holding the cake closer. I have a ring. Are you really? Wait. Her voice faltered, and her heart dropped as her eyes widened in horror. Jake, this is David's wedding ring. Panic surged through her chest. Her hands trembled as her mind raced. How was her husband's ring here, in this restaurant? Her thoughts spun, each possibility more terrifying than the last. She stared at Jake, but he seemed more annoyed than alarmed. They sat in uncomfortable silence, each trying to process the bizarre turn of events. Then, a shadow fell over the table as a man impeccably dressed in a crisp suit approached. Without invitation, he sat down, his presence radiating authority. His sharp, steady gaze carried the precision of someone used to command. Barbara and Jake exchanged bewildered glances but didn't speak. I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen, the man said, his voice calm and measured. I won't take up much of your time. His composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos at the table. Jake, ever brash, leaned forward. His expression hardened. What the hell is going on? Who are you? And what kind of twisted joke is this? Are you looking for trouble? The man remained unflustered. My name is William, he said, his tone unwavering. I would ask you to remain calm. There's no need for aggression. From his jacket, William pulled out a slim leather folder and handed it to Barbara. Before the lady opens this, I have a proposition for you, Jake. Jake's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his expression. I understand you're a man who enjoys a good gamble, William continued, nodding toward the joker card still clutched in Jake's hand. My client has a simple request. A bet, $50,000. If you're willing to make the wager, you can walk away tonight without further consequences. Jake burst into laughter, the sound echoing loudly enough to attract a few curious stares from nearby tables. Are you serious? Perhaps you also want me to strip on the table and dance for the audience? This is insane. Who's pulling the strings here? David? Is he your client? William's smile didn't falter. He nodded once, confirming Jake's suspicion. Barbara's fingers fumbled as she opened the folder William had handed her. Her gasp was audible as her eyes fell on the contents. Divorce papers, already signed and ready to file. No, no, this can't be happening, she stammered, her voice trembling. How did this even? What is this? Jake glanced at the papers, his expression turning smug. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing dismissively. Barbara, baby, he said, his voice dripping with bravado. I'm sure it's nothing. Don't worry about it. It seemed that David had decided to take a bold stand. Jake's response was nonchalant, as if it didn't faze him. So what? It's not a big deal. Honestly, it's about time you cut ties with that fool, he said, shrugging it off. Barbara's voice faltered as she tried to explain. Her mind was still reeling. Jake, you don't understand. David and I have so many unresolved financial issues, and now he's filed for divorce, out of nowhere. I don't even know what's going to happen. Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence. Relax, Barbara. We'll get a good lawyer, and your David will be begging for mercy before this is over. He dismissed William with a wave of his hand. As for this ruined evening, I'll take care of him. I'll show him his place before you even have to think about what happens next. Barbara's hands trembled as she opened the folder William had given her. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the contents. Divorce papers, already signed, ready to be filed. No, this can't be happening, she stammered. How did this even? What is this? Jake glanced at the papers with a dismissive smirk. Barbara, baby, relax, he said, his voice oozing with confidence. It's about time you dumped that puppy. This whole thing is nothing. Barbara's anxiety only grew as Jake's callousness sank in. Her hands shook as she held the divorce papers in her lap. But Jake, this is serious. Before she could finish, William spoke again, his voice calm and steady. So, you're refusing my offer? He asked, his tone almost wearied. Of course, I'm refusing, Jake retorted, his voice rising. Why should I listen to some guy who thinks he can dictate terms to me? Let him go to hell. And you, get out of here too, or I'll call the staff to throw you out. William remained unfazed. I'm sorry, he said simply. No need to make a scene. I'll leave. Barbara has a surprise waiting for her at home. Good night. With that, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking softly against the restaurant floor. Barbara's heart raced. A surprise, she echoed, her voice trembling. What is going on? Jake, I need to go home right now. I'm scared. Jake remained calm, flashing her a reassuring grin. Relax, Barbara. I'll go with you. Don't worry. I'll handle everything. You're with me now. She didn't respond, her thoughts swirling. Jake paid the bill and led her out, his upbeat demeanor a stark contrast to her growing sense of dread. The drive home was tense. While Jake hummed along to the radio, Barbara stared out the window, her mind filled with anxious thoughts. What if David is waiting for me at home? She asked softly. Jake chuckled, dismissing her fears. Even better. I'll have a little chat with him and put him in his place. Barbara didn't feel reassured. Maybe we shouldn't go. This has gone too far, Jake. But Jake interrupted her, his tone still light. Come on, Barbara. He's already filed for divorce, and he's got the papers ready. What's the difference now? Let's face the consequences, and I'll teach him a lesson. Barbara swallowed her fear, but it didn't ease the growing pit in her stomach. As they pulled into her driveway, her heart sank. The lights were on inside the house, glowing eerily through the windows. Jake parked with a flourish. Let's get this over with, he said, stepping out of the car with confident strides. Barbara followed him reluctantly, her steps heavy with dread. She knew whatever awaited them inside would not be good. As they entered the house, the silence was palpable. Barbara flipped the light switch, revealing an eerily quiet home. She glanced around, half expecting David to jump out from the shadows. But there was no sign of him. In fact, most of his belongings were gone. Jake chuckled, glancing around with satisfaction. See? I told you. He ran off like a coward. Probably back to his parents' ranch. Barbara didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the room, uneasy. Something wasn't right. Then, her gaze landed on the kitchen table where a sleek black folder rested, its presence conspicuous. A chill ran through her as she approached it. She opened the folder, gasping as she read the handwritten note inside. "Darling, I know everything about your double life. I have 3 months' worth of evidence. Divorce is the only way for you to atone for your sins. But there will be consequences. And by the way, look in this folder for some information about your impudent lover." Barbara's heart raced. She flipped to the next set of documents, photographs and printouts that left her breathless. The images were of Jake, with other women, one at a restaurant, another at a hotel lobby, a third laughing with him at a bar. Tears welled in Barbara's eyes as she held the evidence out to Jake, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this? Jake, what is this? Are you seeing other women?" Barbara's voice quivered as she held up the photos. Jake's expression shifted from anger to a defensive smirk. It's a pathetic fake," he said, leaning closer to point at one of the images. "Look at this one. It's clearly doctored. This woman? She's just a former client, a contractor I worked with. And this one," he jabbed at another photo, his tone quickening, "is just a college friend. Sure, I was polite and friendly, but that's it. These are just photos from casual conversations. They're twisting things to make something out of nothing." Barbara sniffled, wiping her eyes as she tried to process his explanation. "So you're saying these are all misunderstandings?" Jake placed his hands on her shoulders, locking eyes with her. "Absolutely. These photos are just designed to hurt us. It's all part of David's twisted game. Look closely. Do you see me kissing anyone? No. It's clearly fake, designed by a good editor. These are lies, Barbara. You can't let him get to you." Barbara hesitated but nodded, her doubts easing under Jake's reassurance. However, inside, Jake was seething, his mind racing for more excuses to cover up the damning evidence. He couldn't let Barbara suspect him, not now, especially with David's manipulative tactics at play. Barbara turned back to the folder, her blood running cold as she read the next note. "Tell Jake that if he wants, he can make a $100,000 charitable donation to my account. It'll clear his conscience, and he can breathe easier." Jake's face twisted with fury as he read the note. "This is insane," he roared. $100,000? What does he think this is, some kind of mob operation? He grabbed the papers, tearing them to shreds with raw anger. "I'll tell you what's going to happen next. Tomorrow, I'm hiring the best damn lawyer in the city. We're going to destroy David in court, just like I'm ripping these papers apart." "This ends now." Barbara watched him, a swirl of emotions running through her as Jake's fiery determination temporarily soothed her nerves. She clung to the belief that Jake was a man who would stand by her, no matter what. After tearing up the papers, Jake threw them into the trash and turned to Barbara. "We're not letting him win. Trust me, Barbara. I've got this under control." Barbara wiped away her tears and nodded slowly, Jake's confidence spreading a small sliver of hope. The tension seemed to ease as Jake poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one toward her. "This will help you relax," he said smoothly. Barbara took the glass hesitantly, her mind still racing. Jake leaned in closer, his gaze intense. "Let David go. This is your house now, without him. Let's make a statement." Barbara blinked, taken aback. "Jake, I don't know. This feels strange." Jake grinned, his confidence unwavering. "Strange? No, it's victory. It's us showing David that he doesn't own you anymore. Trust me, you'll thank me for this." His words, his tone, and his unrelenting charisma slowly wore down her resistance. Eventually, she relented, and he swept her into his arms, leading her to the bedroom. The next morning, Jake dressed sharply for work, fixing his tie as he spoke. "Don't worry about a thing, babe. I'll cover for you at the office. I'll tell them you're sick and need a couple of days off. I'll also focus on finding a lawyer and putting together a plan to take down your bastard husband." Barbara nodded, still groggy but somewhat reassured by his confidence. Jake kissed her cheek and left for the day, leaving her alone in the house. As the silence settled around her, Barbara stared out the window, holding a cold cup of coffee. "Maybe this is for the best," she murmured to herself. "To hell with David. I'll have a different life now." Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A notification from her bank appeared on the screen. "Your account has been frozen." Panic flooded her as she scrambled to log into her banking app. Her heart sank as she saw that the joint savings account had been emptied. All of it, transferred into separate accounts she couldn't access. Frantically, she called David, but the call went to voicemail. Her anxiety grew as each second passed, until her phone finally rang. It was David. Barbara answered with a mix of anger and desperation. David, what did you do? You froze my account and took our money. You're being a coward. You made a show of handing over documents yesterday, but we need to talk about all this. If you don't, I'm going to be very angry. David's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of disappointment. Barbara, you made your choice. You'll get your explanations in court. Until then, I'm done discussing anything with you. You can't just, Barbara began. But David interrupted, his tone firm. I'm not interested in listening to you anymore. You didn't even bother to call me last night. Address all your questions to my lawyer. The line went dead, leaving Barbara trembling with fury and fear. Desperate for support, she dialed Jake. After a few rings, he answered, his voice unusually dry. Barbara explained what David had done, freezing the bank account and taking all the money. Jake listened calmly before replying, Barbara, we've got a problem. What now? She asked, her voice breaking. David is a sneaky bastard, Jake said, his tone turning serious. He's already informed the big bosses at the company. He told them about us, about the affair. Barbara gasped. What? What did you tell them to justify it? Jake sighed heavily. I told them it was a misunderstanding, that your husband is going crazy because of the divorce. I said he's paranoid and trying to ruin both of us out of spite. Did they believe you? The bosses are giving me some leeway. I'm a valuable asset to the company, so they're turning a blind eye for now. But I need to clean this up quickly. Barbara clutched her phone, her voice trembling. What do we do now? Jake's voice turned sharp and commanding. I'm looking for a lawyer. I'll involve some influential friends to make sure we win this. But Barbara, I need David's number. I have to talk to him man to man. She hesitated, unsure if giving Jake the number was the right choice. But Jake's confidence reassured her once more. Okay, she whispered, reciting David's number. Jake jotted it down. Don't worry, Jake said, his tone softening. I'll handle this. Barbara hung up, her nerves frayed but holding on to the hope that Jake would keep his promises. Jake paced the floor of his office, his phone pressed to his ear, his hand clenched into a fist as the line connected. The moment he heard David's voice, Jake launched into a tirade. Listen, you little punk, Jake growled. You've started a dangerous game, and you don't even realize what you've gotten yourself into. You've crossed all the lines, and now this is personal, a vendetta. David's silence on the other end only fueled Jake's anger. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. But I'm giving you a chance, David. Divorce Barbara without any of your little tricks or schemes, and explain to me why the hell you're talking to my management about me and Barbara. You better fix this, apologize, and admit that it's all a misunderstanding. Do that, and I'll forget about you. Otherwise, Jake let the threat hang in the air, his tone menacing. David's faint chuckle came through the phone, followed by his calm response. A bet, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. That's all I offered you, Jake. A bet in the form of a charitable contribution. Consider it compensation for the damage you helped cause to my marriage. Barbara will bear full responsibility for her choices, and so will you. But you, Jake, your arrogance and impudence, those piss me off. Jake gritted his teeth, barely holding back his fury. Oh, you think you're clever, huh? David ignored him and continued, his voice composed but firm. Here's my last offer, Jake. Make a charitable contribution to my account, $200,000, and I'll ensure your nerves stay calm and your conscience gets a little clearer. Jake's voice exploded in rage. You think I'm going to roll over and hand you that kind of money? Who the hell do you think you are? I'll crush you like a bug. You hear me? I have real friends, powerful ones. I'll bring in the best damn lawyer money can buy, and you'll regret ever messing with me. David remained unshaken, his tone as composed as ever. You're welcome to try, Jake, David said coldly. But mark my words, you'll suffer for every step you've taken. The bets are made, gentlemen. His voice turned icy as he finished. Goodbye, Jake. I have nothing more to say to you. The call ended abruptly before Jake could throw another insult. Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, muttering curses under his breath. That smug little bastard, he growled. He thinks he can play with me. But deep down, a small, nagging voice he refused to acknowledge began to stir. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt the unsettling sting of uncertainty. The first day of the divorce trial erupted in a storm of revelations. David and his lawyer presented a mountain of evidence, photographs, messages, and detailed accounts of Barbara's secret meetings with Jake. Each piece painted a vivid picture of their betrayal. Barbara's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man with a knack for stalling, objected to the immediate admission of the evidence. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "these materials require thorough verification. Until their authenticity can be confirmed, we cannot allow them to unfairly influence the court's proceedings." It was a clever move, buying time for Barbara and Jake. Jake smirked from the gallery, silently commending the lawyer's strategy. Time was exactly what he needed. Time to pressure David to use his connections and resources to make this whole ordeal disappear. When the hearing ended, the judge adjourned the case until the next session. Barbara looked visibly shaken, but Jake reassured her with his usual bravado. "Don't worry, babe, we've got this. Just give me a few more days, and I'll make sure David wishes he'd never messed with us." As Jake wrapped up calls to friends who could help him corner David, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. "Boss?" "Jake," the boss said curtly when he answered. "I need you in my office."
Now.
The line went dead before Jake could respond. Something about the tone of the call suggested trouble. Trouble Jake might not be able to charm his way out of. Jake entered the boss's office, his usual confidence diminished but not entirely gone. The boss, a sharp man who rarely minced words, gestured for Jake to sit. "Jake," the boss began, his tone cold. "Frankly, just for that murky story with Barbara, I should have fired both of you. But I turned a blind eye, believing your explanation, until now." Jake immediately launched into a defense. "Sir, I'm her boss. I couldn't abandon her while her husband's clearly unhinged. There are court hearings coming up, and once that's sorted, everything will calm down." The boss frowned, tapping his fingers on the desk. "We're not here to talk about your personal drama, Jake. I've received some very disturbing information." Jake stiffened, his stomach tightening. "What kind of information?" The boss leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "It seems you've been involved in fraud, mismanaging the company's advertising budget, funneling money into shell companies, and pocketing the difference. The details are extensive." Jake's mouth went dry. "That's ridiculous. I'd never." The boss raised a hand to silence him and pressed a button on his desk phone. Moments later, the head of security walked in, followed by another man in a sharp suit. "This is a friend of mine," the boss said, gesturing to the man. "He works in the department for investigating financial and economic crimes. For now, this investigation will remain unofficial, but we're going to verify everything that's come to light. If it's true, Jake, you're looking at massive fines and possibly a criminal case." Jake stammered, his confidence cracking. "I don't know where this is coming from. Someone's trying to ruin me." The boss tilted his head, scrutinizing him. "By the way, Jake, do you play poker?" Jake froze, the question catching him off guard. No. I mean, not really. Just occasionally for fun." The boss slid a folder across the desk, opening it to reveal photographs. They showed Jake sitting at a poker table in dingy backrooms, surrounded by unsavory characters. "People say you sometimes win, sometimes lose big." Jake's face turned pale as he struggled to form a coherent response. This isn't what it looks like. It's just, I wasn't.
It's harmless."
The boss's expression remained icy. "Harmless, Jake? You've put this company's reputation on the line. From this moment forward, you're under scrutiny. Every move you make, every decision. It's all being monitored." Jake left the office under the watchful eye of a security guard, his mind racing. Back in his own office, he collapsed into his chair, clutching his head in despair. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. A message from David. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Confidence." Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, frustration boiling over. Moments later, it buzzed again. This time a call from Barbara. "Jake," she began, her voice filled with worry. "Can we meet for dinner and discuss an action plan? We need to figure out what to do, Jake." Barbara's voice trembled, desperation in her tone. Jake, his patience at its breaking point, snapped back. "I'm not going to solve other people's problems, Barbara. Figure it out yourself. Why the hell did you even drag me into this mess?" "Jake, please," she pleaded, but he cut her off, his voice cold. "I have more important things to deal with.
Bye."
Without hesitation, he hung up and blocked her number. Barbara sat on the edge of her bed, her face buried in her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. The weight of her decisions crushed her. She had lost everything. David, Jake, and even the life she had once taken for granted. Just days after Jake's betrayal, Barbara received devastating news. She was being fired. Her boss cited the public scandal, explaining that the company couldn't afford the damage her drama had caused to its reputation. On the same day, She learned that Jake was under investigation for financial fraud at work. Her divorce case concluded swiftly and brutally, with David's overwhelming evidence ensuring she received nothing. No assets, no financial support, only the legal fees for her own lawyer. Desperate, Barbara had to take out a loan to cover her debts. Eventually, she secured a new job, but it was a far cry from her previous position. Her salary was modest, and her responsibilities tedious. Every day, she was reminded of how far she had fallen, and every night, she cried herself to sleep. Jake, once brimming with confidence and charm, now sat in his small, disheveled apartment. His lawyer had warned him that the fines for his fraud were just the beginning. Jail time was likely. He stared at the evidence David had amassed, realizing the thoroughness of the investigation. The truth was undeniable. David had uncovered not just his affair with Barbara, but also the fraudulent shell companies and embezzlement schemes Jake had orchestrated. Jake's darker side had been fully exposed, with the Betrayal investigation beginning after David's anonymous tip. His rage toward David burned hot, but there was nothing he could do. David had outplayed him, and Jake knew it. Meanwhile, David sat in the quiet comfort of his parents' ranch, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He thought back to William, the private detective he had hired. The man had been worth every penny, collecting overwhelming evidence not only against Barbara but also Jake. It had been an expensive endeavor, but for David, honor and dignity were priceless. Now free from the weight of betrayal, he focused on what truly mattered: family and rebuilding his life. He had no need to gloat or seek further revenge. He had already won. As he watched the sun set over the horizon, David felt a sense of peace. He was ready to leave the past behind and start anew. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
It always seemed like getting to the top took longer than it should. It was hard to tell if the guys were looking forward to a night off, or just annoyed about losing 2 hours of work. 2 hours into a 12-hour shift, the methane alarm went off. I still had the 4 sticks and their caps tucked in the yellow bag slung over my shoulder. There wouldn't be any blasting tonight, which meant I was stuck lugging the bag around again. The magazine, where the dynamite was kept locked up, only stayed open long enough for the dogwatch crew to check out their daily supply. Once again, I'd be taking the yellow satchel home with me. It was a hassle, sure, but the extra pay made up for it. I grabbed my Carhartt from the locker and headed out. Gray clouds were rolling in over the eastern mountains, and by the time I crossed the parking lot, Randy had the truck warmed up and ready to go. Damn it, Caleb. Why can't you just get yourself an old beater so you'd at least have something to drive? You know I can't afford it, I said. Just keeping up with the payments on Linda's Camaro has me scraping by. Feeding 3 kids and dealing with a high-maintenance wife isn't cheap. You're the most whipped guy I know, Randy shot back. She's been running your life since grade school. He wasn't wrong. Linda had latched onto me when we were kids. She was bossy and demanding, but also the prettiest girl in the county. I put up with her antics just to be close to her. Somewhere along the way, though, things got out of hand. We were barely out of the lot when the rain started coming down steady. A dark, cold rain that looked like it would last all night. The only good thing about the rain, as far as I was concerned, was that it washed away the coal dust that clung to everything. Farmers didn't see it that way, of course. The wipers on Randy's old F-100 slapped rhythmically against the windshield, leaving streaks in their wake. The crack on the passenger side, like always, was dripping water onto the dash. Great. Just what I needed, a beat-up old truck of my own. It was only a 15-minute drive to the trailer park, but the place turned into a swamp every time it rained. You'd think they'd lay down some gravel now and then, but that was wishful thinking. All we needed was a down payment to get out of there, but every time I managed to save a little, Linda found something else to spend it on. I'll pick you up tomorrow, same time, Randy said as we pulled up. Thanks, Randy. We'd grown up together. Neither of us ever planning to end up in the mines, but here we were. He'd wanted to join the Air Force, but they wouldn't take him without a high school diploma. I'd planned to be a certified auto mechanic, but that dream didn't pan out either. Hey, Caleb, where's the Camaro? Randy asked. The bright yellow car was hard to miss, except when it wasn't there. I just shrugged and headed toward the double-wide as Randy drove off. Inside, my 3 boys were sitting cross-legged on the floor, glued to the TV. Where's your mother? I asked. Jason, my 8-year-old, glanced up at me and shrugged. When did she leave? About 10 minutes after you left for work, Jason said, barely glancing away from the TV. I could tell I was interfering with their cartoon-watching marathon. What was she wearing? Her red dress. That told me plenty. Linda didn't put on that dress for a grocery run. It was low-cut, short, and clung to her in all the right places. I couldn't deny she looked incredible in it, but I knew better than to think she was just out running errands. I slid my crib can into the refrigerator. It would still be good tomorrow, and turned back to Jason. Did your mom feed you before she left? Jason, the only one paying me any attention, shook his head. No. I made dinner. What did you eat? Cocoa Puffs. The three of them were glued to the TV, barely acknowledging me. I could see that my questions were an unwelcome interruption. Jason might have been resourceful, but at 8, he wasn't old enough to be watching himself, let alone his brothers. Terry was 6, and Dylan, at nearly 3, still needed plenty of help. Jason, I said, when you get a chance, put some clean pants on Dylan. Looks like he peed himself again. I didn't understand why Dylan wasn't potty trained yet, but Linda had always been the type to let the kids figure things out for themselves, or not. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and took a quick leak. Outside, the rain was pounding harder than ever, but I felt a growing urge to go find Linda. Where was she tonight? Things had started going sideways about 4 years ago. That was when Linda began going out with her friend, Betty Ann. At first, it was just once a week, and I stayed home with the boys. She slowed down a bit when she was pregnant with Dylan, but once he was born, the outings picked up again. When I switched to the night shift at the mine, Linda hired sitters to watch the kids while she went out. Then, about 6 months ago, she stopped bothering with sitters altogether. Randy was right about one thing. I let Linda run the show. From the beginning of our relationship, she was the one calling the shots. She decided where we went, what we did, and how we lived. I never had much of a say in anything. Linda was so exciting, so magnetic, that I'd put up with almost anything just to keep her happy. That was my problem. I prioritized her happiness over everything else. If I'm being honest, the best part of our relationship was the sex. I had more of it and better than any guy I knew. But that wasn't enough to make up for everything else. I did try, at least once, to put my foot down about her going out all the time, but it was a disaster. Linda's dad was a deputy sheriff when we got married, and not long after, he was elected county sheriff. From the start, he didn't like me and made it clear he thought I wasn't good enough for his only daughter. Looking back, I realized he was right. I couldn't give Linda the kind of life she wanted. One night, before she got pregnant with Dylan, I went to a honky-tonk to drag her home. I didn't go quietly about it either. Her father showed up in less than 10 minutes, furious. He was a big man with a temper to match. In front of a packed bar, he slammed me against the wall and warned me that if I ever laid a hand on his daughter, he'd beat the living hell out of me. Linda managed to calm him down, and she did leave with me that night. But after that, I gave up trying to confront her about her nights out. Once Dylan was born, it felt like she kept going out just to spite me. There's a quote I've heard. All men live lives of quiet desperation. I don't know who said it, but they were onto something. I looked at my 3 boys sprawled on the floor and felt something shift inside me. I didn't want to keep living like this. Outside, the rain still came down in heavy sheets. I grabbed the phone and called my mother. Mama, it's Caleb. I need you to do me a favor. Mama and I had always been close, except when it came to Linda. She never warmed to my wife. Linda was smart and beautiful, but Mama always said she was sneaky and couldn't be trusted. Looks like she was right. Everyone was right about Linda, except me. Why aren't you at work, boy? How do you expect to feed those 3 young uns if you're taking time off? I didn't take off. The mine shut down because of the bottom gas again. I need you and Dad to come over and pick up the kids. I've got to go out for a while, and I don't want to leave them here alone. Where's that wife of yours? She asked, her tone sharp. I'm not sure. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again. You do what you have to do, son. You know your daddy, and I will always back you up. Thanks, Mama. Sometimes, it was good to have family. Linda had a cell phone, but I decided not to call her. I already knew it wouldn't do any good. The boys were still glued to the television as I slipped on my Carhartt and grabbed the yellow satchel. I pulled an old army surplus poncho over my head, bracing myself for the cold rain outside. They didn't even glance my way as I stepped out the door. Walking through the mud, I couldn't help but wish I had that beat-up truck Randy teased me about earlier. At least it'd get me out of here faster. It was less than half a mile from the trailer park to Main Street, but it felt like a lot longer in the pouring rain. Once I hit the asphalt, walking got a little easier, though the rain quickly wore me down. The poncho kept my upper body mostly dry, but it only reached my knees, and my Levi's were soaked within 10 minutes. For some reason, my left sock was already wet, a reminder that I needed to waterproof my boots again whenever I found the time. The ponchos had kept the rain off my head, but the wind blew it straight into my face. Every few minutes, I had to wipe my eyes just to see where I was going. Most of the bars were on the far side of town, naturally. This was an odd little place, split by the main street. On one side of the road ran the railroad tracks, and on the other were all the storefronts. Most of the stores were closed now, those that hadn't gone out of business already. The streetlights worked fine, though, and I could see the raindrops glistening as they fell past the glowing bulbs. A couple of cars slowed down to offer me a ride, but I waved them on. I wasn't in the mood for company or explanations. The south end of town stopped just short of the interstate. The last place still open there was Joe's Truck Stop. It used to be Joe's coffee shop before the interstate came through. They still served solid meals and hot coffee, and the truckers liked it for the cheap diesel, always a few cents less than the bigger stops. Between where I was and Joe's, there were at least a dozen bars and half as many motels. I figured Linda wouldn't want to drive too far on a night like this, so I had a decent chance of spotting her car somewhere along the way. All I needed to do was find that yellow Camaro. Too bad I couldn't afford a taxi. It would have made this miserable search a whole lot quicker. The rain just wouldn't let up. The thunder seemed to be fading, but the downpour persisted. The first 3 bars I checked were small, depressing places where mostly older folks nursed the same glass for hours. Not the kind of spot Linda would typically go, but I figured I might as well check them. I stood outside, peering through the windows. The real action was further down the road, where the neon lights flickered in the damp air. By now, my left foot was thoroughly soaked and starting to feel cold. I kept moving, scanning the parked cars carefully. Everything seemed to blend into shades of gray until I got within about 100 feet. I guess it was just another trick of the rain, something I hadn't noticed before. The roundabout was always the liveliest place in town. When Linda and I went out, we always ended up there. After several more dead ends, I finally made it. The place was big enough that I couldn't avoid walking in. I stood at the end of the bar, drenched and looking like a sorry mess. Damn, Caleb. You look like hell. What the hell are you doing out here on a night like this? Walt, the bartender and owner of the roundabout, came over with a grin and handed me a dry bar towel. Stay put, Caleb. I don't want to have to clean up after you, too. I wiped my face with the towel and ran it through my hair. Even with the hood of the poncho pulled up, my hair was drenched. When I handed the towel back to Walt, he gave me a short drink in exchange. I glanced around the room, taking in the crowd. Among the sea of people, I spotted Betty Ann. She was with 2 guys, but clearly seemed alone. She left about 20 minutes ago, Caleb, Walt said. I passed him the empty glass, giving him a nod to show I heard and understood. She was with Howard Garrett. He usually parks in the rear lot at the Whispering Pines, he added. I pulled the poncho hood back over my head, nodded again to Walt, and stepped out into the night. The rain had slowed, though it still lingered. The lightning was far off to the west, and the thunder had almost faded. It was only about a 10-minute walk to the Whispering Pines. My left foot was still bothering me, so I found myself shaking it every 100 feet or so. When I arrived, the yellow Camaro was parked next to Howard's large dual-wheel pickup. The back parking lot was dark. Guess that was no accident. I wasn't there for long, about 5 minutes. I was good at my job and took pride in my work. The walk back to the roundabout was quicker, as the rain had reduced to a light drizzle. I slipped off the poncho before heading back inside. It was clear that Walt didn't know how to approach me or what to say. He was a good guy, and I could tell he didn't want to be the one delivering bad news. He had no clue what I was up to, and that was fine with me. I offered him a small smile to reassure him, trying to ease the tension, and then asked him to have the waitress bring Betty Ann over. Betty Ann's voice dripped with sarcasm as she approached. What's up, Caleb? Why the hell aren't you at work? It took everything I had not to lash out. The urge to slap her was almost overwhelming. I kept my cool, instead asking, where is she, Betty Ann? Where the hell is Linda? And don't feed me any bullshit. She shot back, well, I guess she's home with your kids. Isn't that where she's supposed to be? Maybe you should get your butt back there and handle your business. Walt, sensing the tension, slid a beer toward me, probably trying to diffuse the situation. I took a long drink, feeling the cold liquid settle in my stomach, then leaned in toward Betty Ann. I'm going to find her, I said, my voice low but steady. And I'm going to kill her and any man she's with. Do you understand? The cocky arrogance in Betty Ann's demeanor vanished immediately. She seemed genuinely taken aback, and that impressed me. My words were far from my usual self, but something about this moment made me break from my usual calm. Walt, too, looked stunned, but I noticed a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I asked if you understand, I repeated, my tone firmer. Betty nodded, but the words didn't come. She was usually quick with her comebacks, but not this time. As she walked back to her table, she glanced at me twice, her eyes wide. I handed Walt the empty glass, and he surprised me by offering his hand to shake before I left. That was something he'd never done before. Across the room, Betty was already on her phone, talking rapidly. I grabbed the poncho from outside the door and tossed it, along with the empty yellow bag, into the dumpster by the bar. I wasn't trying to cover my tracks. I had no intention of sticking around. The mine would likely catch hell for the missing dynamite, but I wasn't going back there, either. I figured I had about 10 minutes to reach the truck stop if I hurried. Joe's was as busy as usual. The asphalt was still slick from the rain, but thankfully, it had stopped. I had to talk to 3 truck drivers before one finally agreed to give me a ride. Houston sounded good. Just as we hit the ramp to the interstate, there was a loud explosion about a quarter of a mile away. We saw the orange fireball and black smoke rise up, even in the dark. My driver muttered something, but I didn't catch it. He didn't notice the smile on my face as I stared out the window. I had no trouble landing a job at the Pasta de Conchos mine near Palau. They were glad to get a certified shot fired after losing several men. Apparently, my credentials helped them meet some insurance requirements. As for the yellow Camaro, it vanished along with my wife. They held a memorial service, but there was no casket. Howard was blown across the parking lot by the blast, ending up splattered on the side of a dumpster. I felt bad for Howard, but at least he had a funeral. I don't think I'll be able to go back home, considering there's no statute of limitations for what I've done. Since blasting is a federal offense, the ATF is also looking for me. My mom and dad are bringing the boys down this summer. At least I don't have to wonder anymore. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm Anna, a 33-year-old homemaker. My husband, Leo, and I have been married for 4 years. But we haven't been able to have a child yet. We're undergoing fertility treatments, but conceiving has proven difficult. One day, as I was returning from the grocery store, I noticed a little girl, a complete stranger, squatting in front of my house. I wondered why she was outside in the cold winter weather without a coat, so I approached her and asked, "Are you waiting for someone? Can you tell me your name?" "Abigail." "Abigail, okay. Where's your mother?" "Mommy went somewhere," she replied. "Are you lost? What's your mother's name?" "Audrey." "Audrey." My heart sank. Audrey, the sender of the letter, was my older sister. She had left home at 20 and never returned. It's been nearly 17 years since we last saw her. As a teenager, she often ran away, got into trouble with men, and caused financial and emotional strain. Now, to find out she had a child. Abigail handed me a piece of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were the words, "Take care of this child for a while." "No way," I whispered. "Are you Audrey's daughter?" "Mommy said to stay here because you're her sister," Abigail explained. I took her hand and let her inside. She was freezing and trembling. I wondered how long she'd been outside. Audrey had always been an irresponsible sister, but leaving her child like this was shocking. I'd always wanted a child but couldn't have one. Pushing aside my feelings, I turned on the stove and wrapped Abigail in a warm blanket. "Abigail, are you hungry?" "Yes, I haven't eaten anything since yesterday." "You haven't eaten?" My concern deepened. "I'll get you some food right away." I heated up some pumpkin soup for her. "Yesterday, I made some pumpkin soup," I said as I gave it to Abigail. It was her first time trying it, and she eagerly drank a lot, clearly enjoying the taste. "This is delicious." "It's really good," she exclaimed with a big smile. I was delighted to see her enjoy the soup so much, but it also saddened me as I wondered what kind of meal she was used to. Instead of questioning her about her usual diet, I focused on cooking more food for her to enjoy. I made fried chicken, an omelet, and rice, and she devoured everything, praising each dish as delicious and tasty. Once she seemed completely satisfied, I suggested we take a bath. It seemed she hadn't bathed in a few days, and her hair was greasy. "Abigail, how about a bath?" I asked. Her expression tensed for a moment, and I could tell she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. "You don't like baths?" I asked. "No, it's fine," she replied hesitantly. I hurried to the bedroom to find some smaller clothes for her to wear as pajamas. When I returned to the living room, Abigail was gone. Hearing water running in the kitchen, I peeked in and found her trying to wash her hair in the kitchen sink. "What are you doing? The water is so cold," I exclaimed. Abigail apologized, but I assured her she didn't need to. I wrapped her in a blanket and took her to the bathroom. She seemed amazed as I let her inside. "This is just like the house I saw on TV," she exclaimed. From her reaction, it seemed the house where Abigail lived did not have a proper bathroom. It broke my heart to think that Audrey made her wash in cold tap water from the kitchen to save on gas money. Holding back tears, I undressed Abigail and gently placed her in the warm bathtub. "It's so warm." "Are baths always this warm?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, they are. From now on, you can take a warm bath every day." I said, "Really?" "I'm so happy," she replied with a big smile. I helped Abigail warm up and get clean in the bath. Her hair was slightly tangled, but I treated it to make it more manageable, and she soon looked like herself again. After dressing her in my loungewear, we relaxed on the couch in the living room as we waited for Leo to come home. When Leo walked in, Abigail seemed startled and drew back in fear. "I'm home," he called out. "Welcome back," I replied. "This is the girl I told you about." "Hello," Leo greeted, but Abigail continued to shy away. "It's okay," I reassured her. "This is my husband, Leo. He's very kind, so you don't need to be afraid of him." I explained the situation to Leo, and he was visibly upset. "That's unforgivable. We'll keep her here for a while," he declared. Of course, I agreed. How could she abandon her own child? Once Leo and I had discussed the situation, we went back to Abigail, who was curled up in the living room. I spoke gently to her. "Abigail, as I mentioned, this is my husband, Leo." "Hi, Abigail, please call me Uncle Leo," he added. Abigail nodded timidly. I went on to explain, "The three of us will be living together here for a while. Is that okay with you? Is it really okay for me to stay here?" Abigail asked hesitantly. "Of course," I said with a reassuring smile. "And once we get settled, you'll be able to go to elementary school." "I've never been to school," Abigail said quietly. "You've never been to school? What about kindergarten?" "I haven't gone to kindergarten because I'm no one," Abigail mumbled. My heart ached hearing her words. She was too young to understand why she might feel this way. I decided not to press her further that day and let her rest. Instead, the next day, we would find a way to help her adjust to her new life. I informed my parents about Abigail's situation, and they rushed over to see us. Upon meeting Abigail, they introduced themselves as her grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa, and enveloped her in a comforting hug. Abigail seemed puzzled but happy, as if she had never realized she had grandparents before. After entrusting Abigail to my parents' care, I headed to City Hall to obtain Audrey's family records. To my surprise, Audrey was unmarried, and there was no record of any children. It appeared that Abigail's birth had never been officially registered, making her essentially a non-existent child who never received any formal notices, such as enrollment for elementary school. This revelation shed light on why Abigail referred to herself as no one. After consulting with various authorities, including the Child Consultation Center and the municipal office, we finally managed to establish Abigail's family register. I happily informed her, "Abigail, now you can go to elementary school." I'm so happy for you. By this time, it had been over a month since Abigail came to live with us, but she hadn't opened up much. She always seemed skittish, especially whenever Leo or I moved. Additionally, whenever she made a mistake, she would apologize excessively, curling up her body and covering her head. It was evident that Audrey's past actions had left a lasting impact on her. Abigail, you don't have to apologize so much, I reassured her. Uncle Leo and I will never get mad at you, and we will never harm you. I promise. Really? Abigail asked with a glimmer of hope. Of course. I replied sincerely, I made a promise. But despite that, Abigail's shyness persisted. However, as time passed, she gradually became more talkative and even began to smile more often. Then one day, Abigail blurted out, I wonder when she will come for me. Those words struck a chord with me, evoking a sense of sadness. Despite Audrey's mistreatment, Abigail still longed for her mother. Since Abigail's arrival, every day had been filled with joy for me. We had wanted children so badly and treated Abigail as our own daughter. We hoped she would stay with us for a long time. The day after Abigail's statement, she received an invitation to elementary school. I was relieved that she would finally experience the same school life as other children. Now that it's settled, we need to prepare for school, I said to Abigail. We'll need to buy a school bag, stationery, and lots of clothes. Let's go shopping today for new clothes and stuff. I can get new clothes. I've already got some, Abigail replied. It's not enough. You'll need more comfortable clothes for school, I insisted. So, Abigail, Leo, and I went to the shopping mall and got everything she needed for school. I was so excited about preparing for her school entrance that I ended up buying a lot of clothes and stationery. As we headed home, the three of us laughed and joked about buying too many things. However, to my surprise, I saw Audrey standing in front of our house. Mom! Selena exclaimed. Audrey responded coldly, it's not, welcome home. What were you thinking? How dare you come here? I stepped in, trying to calm the situation. Hey, calm down. Don't yell. It's not productive. First, you need to apologize to Abigail. But Audrey only glanced at Abigail and refused to make eye contact. What are you trying to do? I asked. We can't just stand here talking. Let me in the house. I'll do it, even if you don't tell me. Let me go, Abigail, Audrey said, ignoring my question. I decided to let Audrey in and ask her what was going on. Is this your husband? She asked, pointing at Leo. He's a nice guy. Nice to meet you. I'm Leo, he replied. I don't know how to say this, given it's our first meeting, but the way you've treated your child makes you an unfit parent, Leo stated boldly. Audrey seemed taken aback by Leo's boldness. You're too arrogant, my brother-in-law. You can't talk to me like that. You don't know me. Maybe not, but I do know you didn't take care of her properly. How could you neglect your own child? Leo countered. Audrey, clearly irritated by our accusations, seemed unable to grasp the gravity of her actions. I was perplexed by her lack of accountability. I asked Abigail how she felt about seeing her mother, and it was clear she was still scared. She couldn't look Audrey in the eye and recoiled in fear. Initially, I assumed Selena missed her mother, but now I wasn't so sure. As I was contemplating this, Audrey spoke up. You two don't have kids, right? She asked. No, but so what? I responded. Well, I'm going to leave this child with you. She declared, I've raised her through the toughest stages of her life. You should be grateful to have an older kid. Now Leo was incredulous. Do you even know what you're saying? You're abandoning your own child as though she's an object to be handed off. I know exactly what I'm saying, Audrey shot back. I'm giving you Shavos people a kid to raise. You should be thankful. I shook my head in disbelief. That's outrageous. We're not giving her back to you, even if you ask. We've already made her a family register, and she's going to start elementary school next month. We'll make sure she's happier than she was with you. Oh, so you've made a family register for her, Audrey retorted, seemingly indifferent. I did, I responded. Why didn't you file a birth certificate? Audrey questioned. Because if I had, they would know I have a child. I didn't want to disrupt my life for such a selfish reason. Audrey's admission explained why Abigail had been unable to attend kindergarten or elementary school. Her callous attitude continued to baffle me. That's not right. Abigail deserves an education. What you've done is neglect, not just active truancy, I told her, knowing that reasoning with Audrey was pointless. Audrey had apparently broken up with Abigail's father before Abigail was born and had never registered the birth. To date, other men, she often left Abigail alone, pretending to be unmarried and childless. Her goal was to find a new partner and raise her child. We'll take care of Abigail, I said, firm in my decision. But please don't come back to see us again. Then give me 10 million yen. I'm giving you a person, so 10 million is a small price to pay, right? Audrey demanded. What are you talking about? You're trying to sell your daughter. I was horrified. Of course, I'm not going to pay you, though. Abigail is a human being, I said firmly. When I refused to pay, Audrey threatened to take Abigail back and confine her at home, forcing her to wash with cold tap water again. I won't let you do that, I said. Fine, 10 million then, she retorted. Well, I can't get it for you today. You'll have to come back later to pick it up. I'll keep Abigail here until then, I said, pretending to agree to her demands to keep Abigail safe. Whatever. I don't want to be bothered with her anyway, Audrey replied dismissively. Though I had no intention of paying Audrey, I lied quickly to prevent her from taking Abigail away. Knowing Audrey might return to reclaim her, Leo and I considered what steps we could take next. But before acting, we wanted to understand how Abigail felt. Abigail, do you want to go back to your mommy? I asked her gently. I don't want to go back. Mom scares me. She always bumps into me and says mean things. I don't want to go back, Abigail confessed. I see, I said gently. The other day, you mentioned wondering when your mother would come for you. Was that because you were afraid she'd make you leave us? Yes, Abigail replied, her eyes downcast. I was worried that if Mommy came, I'd have to go back to that house. But I want to stay here forever. I understand, I reassured her. We'll do everything we can to make sure you can stay with us from now on. With Abigail's feelings clear, Leo and I decided to investigate Audrey's background further. We contacted an investigative firm known to Leo and discovered Audrey was now engaged to a successful lawyer. We formulated a plan to keep Audrey from taking Abigail away and worked discreetly to prepare everything. A week later, when everything was set, we informed Audrey that we had the money and invited her to our home for the exchange. During the meeting, I had my parents care for Abigail. When Audrey arrived, she immediately asked if I had the money. I won't give you the money, and I won't give you Abigail either, I declared firmly. Audrey's expression turned sour. I came all the way here because you said you had the money ready. Now give it to me. Do you realize how heartbroken Abigail is? She challenged. You're trying to sell your own child for money. Unbelievable. Leo exclaimed. How I raise my child is none of your business, Audrey shot back. Children grow up just fine on their own. You don't understand because you don't have kids. Did you even tell your boyfriend about having a child? I asked pointedly. Of course not. He's a successful lawyer, and we're getting married next year. We plan to live happily ever after. Don't bother us, Audrey said dismissively. Just then, the door opened, and Audrey's fiancé, the elite lawyer, walked in. He had heard our conversation. Don't tell me what you just said is true, he said, shocked. Did you lie to me? What's going on? Why are you here? You told me you were unmarried and childless. I've never been married, Audrey said. I just happened to have a child by mistake. By mistake. That's a terrible thing to say. Leo exclaimed, disgusted. The lawyer confronted Audrey. I was about to marry you without knowing you cheated on me. Of course, I'm breaking off the engagement. You lied to me, so you'll need to pay me alimony. Wait, broken engagement alimony? Please don't leave me, Audrey pleaded. Shut up. I can't marry a woman who treats her child like that. I don't even want to see your face, the lawyer replied, turning his back on her. Audrey turned to me, her eyes filled with anger. Rachel, you brought him here. Why did you do this to me? Because I knew I couldn't handle it the usual way. I'm going to discuss Abigail's case with this lawyer, I explained. I was suspicious, but after hearing your words today, I realized the truth. From now on, this lawyer will represent me and my family. You'll regret making an enemy of a lawyer, Audrey threatened. Soon after, a police officer arrived at our house. I had previously reported Audrey for child abandonment, and authorities had secretly recorded our previous conversation. I also informed them of her visit that day. Audrey was taken into custody for child neglect and abandonment, facing a stint behind bars. Although it was a lengthy and complex process, Abigail was eventually allowed to stay with us permanently. The lawyer demanded compensation from Audrey for breaking the engagement, and she faced legal consequences after her release from prison. Audrey lost both her fiancé and Abigail. Additionally, she had to work hard to pay the alimony and child support, which took a toll on her appearance and ability to attract men. Recently, she stormed into our house, crying and demanding Abigail back. She's my baby. Give her back, she pleaded. What are you talking about? Abigail is ours now. I won't let you take her back, I told Audrey firmly. No, not Mommy. Uncle and Auntie are Mommy and Daddy, Abigail chimed in. Rejected by her own daughter, Audrey walked away in despair. I vowed never to let her regain custody of Abigail. Audrey would have to reflect on her actions alone. Meanwhile, Leo and I have stopped our painful infertility treatments. The three of us now live our days filled with laughter and joy. I'm grateful for the happiness Abigail has brought into our lives, and I hope to spend the rest of my life giving her all the love I can.
I discovered protection in my wife's car, uncovered her cheating, and chose divorce without hesitation. A few weeks ago, on a typical Thursday morning, I found myself in the middle of our busy routine, getting our 2 kids ready for school. At 7:30, the chaos was briefly interrupted by the loud ringing of the phone. I became curious, wondering who could be calling at such an early hour. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar code, which piqued my interest even more. "Hello," I answered cautiously, holding the phone to my ear. To my surprise, it was Claire, my wife, on the other end of the line. I couldn't help but wonder why she was calling when we had just spoken the night before. Claire works for a small marketing firm, and her call immediately grabbed my attention. I take care of our children and work from home, while she's always on the move, working at a printing company in the center of our town. Despite our different schedules, it worked well for us, and we managed to make a decent living. We live in a cozy suburban house with 4 bedrooms and a swimming pool, and we are fortunate to have a wide circle of friends. However, Claire told me that the previous night, when she went to the hotel lobby to get a newspaper, her purse was stolen. "Please cancel our credit cards immediately and request new ones urgently. I've already informed Joy, my boss, about this, and she'll arrange for new American Express Company cards to be sent to me overnight, so I can have them before I leave tomorrow. She's also going to transfer some money to help me through this," my wife said, sounding worried. "You're usually very cautious with your belongings. Can you clarify what occurred?" Regrettably, I was a bit absent-minded and left my purse at the cashier's counter while I went to grab some more reading material. When I returned, it was nowhere to be found. The cashier mentioned she was occupied with another customer and didn't notice anything unusual. My driver's license was in there too, but the hotel dispatched staff to check the nearby dumpsters. I hope they locate it, otherwise I might have to rely on a taxi for today's meeting. "Don't worry, I'll handle the credit cards promptly. I apologize for my oversight, dear. Hopefully, apart from about $1,200 in my wallet, we won't face any additional expenses. We can replace the other cards gradually. Fortunately, most of my makeup is still in the room, so I'll be prepared for the morning presentation. How are the kids? I missed the times when we were all together." Let me recount what occurred around 6 weeks ago. Thankfully, I successfully canceled the credit cards before any unauthorized charges were made. However, the wallet containing my driver's license and other non-credit card items had yet to be recovered. So I pushed that concern aside. Life continued as usual, but I have something important to share. Today, I came across a statement from Claire's Fidelity account where she manages a separate investment fund from the inheritance she received after her parents' tragic accident a few years ago. I've always respected her privacy concerning this account, but while searching for our home insurance policy, I stumbled upon a folder containing monthly statements from her personal account. I recalled that the inheritance amounted to around $350,000 following her parents' passing, and I couldn't help but wonder how much it had grown. To my pleasant surprise, it had expanded to over $400,000. While going through the statement, I noticed a withdrawal of $3,000 from the money market account about 6 weeks ago. My curiosity was piqued regarding how she had utilized that money, so I decided to delve deeper into her money market account. To my astonishment, I discovered that she had written a substantial check to a local jewelry store just a couple of days after losing her purse in the same city. I couldn't help but wonder what she had purchased at that jewelry store. She hadn't mentioned buying anything for me, and I hadn't heard her discuss acquiring jewelry for anyone else. Although she has a brother, I couldn't comprehend why he would require a $3,000 gift. After some contemplation, I decided to turn to the computer and visit the jewelry store's website. I jotted down their phone number for further inquiry. I picked up the phone and dialed the jewelry store's number. A woman introduced herself as a store representative and inquired how she could be of assistance. After providing my name and specifying the transaction I wished to inquire about, I explained that we had encountered an issue with the purchase and were wondering if there was a store warranty in place. She proceeded to search for the transaction in her computer, and then inquired about the nature of the problem with the rings. I found myself momentarily puzzled, wondering what kind of rings she could have bought. Fortunately, the woman on the phone swiftly clarified, "Oh, I remember this purchase. When she visited our store, she was visibly distressed and mentioned that her wedding and engagement rings had been stolen. She wanted to replace them, which proved to be quite a challenging task. While we were searching for suitable options to meet her needs, she used the company's credit card as collateral and later sent us a check to cover the cost. Now that you've mentioned the issue with the rings, I'd like to assure you that our store provides a 90-day warranty for such situations. Is it possible that the diamond setting has become loose? This is perplexing because she spoke of replacing the wedding and engagement rings, but never indicated that she had lost them, only mentioning the theft of her purse. It took me some time to process this new information. "Listen," I conveyed to the woman on the phone, "I need to have a discussion about this with my wife before making any further decisions. I'll get back to you later." With that, I bid her farewell. While she appeared somewhat puzzled, my own bewilderment was far more overpowering. It was becoming increasingly apparent that the rings should have been inside her purse when it was stolen. But why would she carry them in her purse if she had no intention of concealing her marital status from others? To the best of my knowledge, there were no professional constraints related to revealing one's marital status. However, if she wanted to appear unmarried in specific social circumstances, disconcerting thoughts began to circulate in my mind, suggesting that she might have contemplated engaging in an extramarital affair while away from home. The mere notion of it made my stomach churn. We had been married for 11 years and were blessed with 2 wonderful children, Jeremy, age 8, and Melissa, age 6. I believed we had a flawless marriage and a picture-perfect family. Our personal life seemed gratifying to me, or at least that's what I had believed. She traveled once a month, staying for 2 or 3 nights in distant cities. If she harbored intentions of such actions, she might have seen it as a discreet opportunity. It seemed that losing the rings had deeply troubled her, leading her to opt for replacements that closely resembled the originals. I had purchased those rings with my modest earnings, so they were not extravagant, and crafting a near replica wasn't too costly. She could have reported the loss to the insurance company, but I probably would have found out. If her purse was genuinely stolen at the hotel, she should have reported it. I couldn't help but wonder what she claimed as missing. I decided to locate the hotel's contact number and made the call. I asked about any records related to the theft of my wife's purse. Surprisingly, they confirmed having a written account of the incident. I requested a copy to be faxed to me, and I received it shortly. The report was composed and signed by Claire herself. In the statement, Claire mentioned that her purse was stolen while she was dancing in the hall. She had left her purse at the booth where she was seated, and upon her return, it had vanished. Remarkably, Claire explicitly noted her hesitation to involve the police. As I absorbed this information, my thoughts raced, overwhelmed by the implications of what I had uncovered. She had deceived me, not only by concealing the truth about the stolen rings, but also by inventing a story about shoplifting. While there could be an alternative explanation, my mind couldn't come up with anything other than the unsettling thoughts swirling in my head. It became clear that I needed to uncover the significance of losing those rings, or else they would persistently occupy my thoughts and drive me to madness. One thing was increasingly evident: those rings were inside her purse when she was dancing with an unknown man. Several weeks had elapsed since the incident, and she was about to embark on another trip in a few days. I realized I needed to gather more details about the schedule for her upcoming trip. I wanted to comprehend what she typically did in the evenings outside our home. If she was involved with other men, perhaps losing the rings had served as a wake-up call, prompting her to reassess her behavior. I knew that if I discovered her infidelity, it would likely spell the end of our marriage, though I dreaded considering how it might impact our children. She was undoubtedly a great mother, but I couldn't bear the thought of her having custody of the kids, especially with her frequent business trips. My mind raced, desperately seeking any potential clues to shed light on her faithfulness. What other information might hint at her actions during her trips? Did she engage in unprotected encounters or insist on using contraceptives? I assumed she would opt for protection because she wouldn't want to risk bringing home infections or the possibility of an unwanted pregnancy. After all, I had a vasectomy after the birth of our second child, rendering pregnancy impossible. She couldn't rely on the men she met having protection, so she must have had her own supply. One question remained: where did she keep them? It was unlikely she stored them at our house or in the car, so the office seemed the most likely place. She probably carried them with her on business trips. I knew she transported her work papers, laptop, and presentation materials in a large briefcase she kept in her office. But if she had an early morning flight, she'd bring her bag home the night before, then pack it in a suitcase for the airport. This detail was crucial. I needed to find an opportunity to search the briefcase before her departure. I hoped her next trip involved an early morning flight. I made a deliberate choice to remain calm and composed, not displaying any signs that something was amiss. As it happened, when the kids returned from school, I was occupied with various tasks and had little time to dwell on my suspicions. Nonetheless, the specter of her infidelity continued to linger in the back of my mind. When Claire returned from work, I found myself in a bit of a mess. While preparing dinner, I accidentally spilled a dish of beans, creating a mess on the floor. The resulting chaos of cleaning up and managing the kids' activities left me looking somewhat disheveled. Fortunately, she didn't seem to notice any unusual behavior from me at that moment. After the commotion settled and everything was cleaned up, I greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. We sat down at the table as we normally did to enjoy dinner and engage in our typical chit-chat. Given our usual routine, I didn't expect her to have any growing suspicions about her upcoming trip. "So, you're heading out on another trip in a couple of days?" I asked. "Yes," she replied with little enthusiasm. "It's the same old routine. I'm not looking forward to it." My curiosity prompted me to dig deeper. "If you don't enjoy it, have you considered applying for a different role? You've been with the company for quite some time and have a good understanding of various aspects of its operations. I think you could adapt to almost any position." She mentioned her desire to gain more experience before transitioning to a desk job. However, I gently appealed to her conscience regarding the kids. "And I really miss you when you're not home," I added, hoping to evoke a sense of guilt. "I know, I'm sorry," she responded sympathetically. "I miss all of you too." Seeking more details, I continued. "So where exactly are you headed this time? Will you be leaving in the morning, giving us a chance to spend some time together before your departure?" I held her gaze, mindful that our children could hear us. Despite trying to appear normal, my anxiety was evident as my stomach rumbled, making it difficult to eat. She seemed to think everything was fine, as her reaction mirrored mine. I wondered if she had stomach issues, but it turned out she was eating without much enjoyment. Perhaps my suspicions were unfounded, but the urge to search her briefcase still lingered, as it could potentially provide insight into her loyalty. "I'm only going to Denton, so I'll be leaving tomorrow morning at 7:30, she mentioned. "I need something to keep me going until I return on Friday," she added playfully, giving me a wink. I responded in a similar playful manner, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. To my surprise, she blushed in response. Her comment about bringing her briefcase home the night before her trip suggested she wouldn't be stopping at the office before heading to the airport. Given her seemingly genuine attitude about the upcoming trip in front of our children and me, one might assume that either she hadn't been involved in any infidelity during her travels, or she had become skilled at concealing such behavior. I hoped to uncover the truth when I examined the contents of her briefcase. On the evening before her planned trip, Claire returned home in high spirits. She parked her car next to mine in the garage as usual and appeared visibly excited. This left me wondering if her excitement was due to our conversation, or if there was another reason behind it. Upon entering the house, she didn't bring her briefcase with her. Assuming it was still in the car, I was busy preparing dinner, so we sat down at the table. She casually asked if I could retrieve her suitcase from the garage after we finished eating. "Certainly," I replied, trying not to show any signs of suspicion. "Are you all set for your trip?" she asked, trying to reassure me. "Oh yes, it's a routine trip. My briefcase is in the car, ready for the journey. I'll pack an overnight bag with the essentials." In an effort to maintain a sense of normalcy, I inquired, "Do you have any plans while you're away?" "No, the kids and I will stick to our usual daily routine during the week. Maybe we can plan something family-friendly for the weekend," she replied, showing enthusiasm for the idea. "Sounds like a plan," I responded genuinely. After we finished dinner, she kindly helped me clear the table in the kitchen and loaded the dishwasher. Once we were done, she headed to the bedroom to pack her things, while I made my way to the garage to retrieve her suitcase. Upon inspecting the car, I didn't find the briefcase inside, leading me to believe it was securely placed in the trunk. Expecting this, I had already devised a plan to access it later in the evening. When I returned to the bedroom with her suitcase, I casually asked, "Do you know where the car keys are? My tire seems to be slowly losing air. If I take it to the station, Jerry can fix it right away." For a brief moment, she appeared puzzled, but then reached for her purse, handing me the car keys. She proposed an alternative, saying, "Couldn't you just use the spare tire? It's meant for emergencies." Taking a resolute stance, I responded, "Yes, the spare tire is for emergencies, but we have enough time to properly fix this. I think that's the best course of action." I hurried back to the garage before she could change her mind. Swiftly, I drove her car out of the garage and headed to the junction station, owned by my friend Jerry from school. Pulling up in front of one of the service bays, I honked my horn to get his attention. Jerry noticed me and opened the bay door, allowing me to drive in before closing it behind me. "What's going on, buddy?" Jerry asked curiously. I replied, "My tire was supposed to be fixed here, but I needed a little time to check something else." Sensing that I might have some issues at home, he asked, "Trouble at home, buddy?" "Maybe," I admitted reluctantly, opening the trunk and retrieving Claire's briefcase. Placing it on a nearby workbench, I unlocked it. Jerry, realizing a customer needed him, simply said, "Well, I've got a customer, so take your time, my friend." Nodding to Jerry, he returned to the small shop attached to his station. I began to search the briefcase meticulously, ensuring that I didn't disturb anything. My hands explored the pockets on the lid unnecessarily, and to my shock, I discovered a package that drew my attention. When I removed it, my heart sank, as I realized it was an open package of contraceptives, with about 3 pieces missing. My worst fears were confirmed. I carefully placed the package back where I found it and closed the briefcase once more. I stashed it in the trunk and secured it just as Jerry returned. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "What's going on?" he asked with evident curiosity. "I'm afraid so," I replied, my voice tinged with a mix of disappointment and sadness. "Mind if I stay here a bit longer? Perhaps you could check the tire pressure while I pretend to have resolved the issue." Jerry gave me a curious look but complied without saying a word. He truly was a loyal friend. While he attended to the tire pressure, I drove out of the bay and pulled up at a gas station. I filled the tank with fuel, unsure of when I would do that for her again. My thoughts were filled with gratitude toward Jerry for his understanding as I made my way back home. As I pulled into the garage, a sense of darkness seemed to envelop my thoughts, and panic began to intensify, fueled by anger and frustration. It was difficult to grasp how she could betray our marriage, our children, and me in such a manner. Amid the receding emotions, I shifted my focus to planning my next steps to secure custody of our children. I needed concrete evidence of her infidelity and misconduct. Despite her shortcomings as a partner, I acknowledged her role as a good mother. The children deserved a maternal figure in their lives. While visitation rights would likely be granted, my ultimate goal was to gain full legal custody. She will have to explain the reasons behind our divorce to her brother and friends. As I entered the house, I called out from the bedroom, saying, "Everything's set. It was just a minor issue with a nail." "Okay, thanks," she replied, still avoiding eye contact. Seeking solace, I went to the kitchen for a beer and then settled in the family room with the kids, who were absorbed in watching a TV show. About 30 minutes later, Claire joined us in the room and sat beside me on the couch. By then, my emotions had settled, but a deep sadness washed over me as I realized our once happy family was soon to be a thing of the past. To my surprise, Claire moved closer and snuggled up to me, whispering in my ear. She asked, "Are you ready for tonight?" After taking a sip of beer, I replied, "I think so, but I have a stomach ache." Claire sympathetically responded, "Oh, that's too bad, honey." Holding on to me, Claire softly said, "I love you," and I instinctively put my arm around her shoulders, grappling with mixed feelings. Despite her betrayal, there was still a hint of affection from her. I couldn't help but wonder why she did it. Was it for excitement or a need for more connection than I could provide? I might never fully understand, but what was clear was the damage to my trust in her. We put the kids to bed together, and as she kissed our little angels goodnight, I couldn't help but look at her, knowing that by morning she would be gone. Their young minds were already accustomed to her frequent travels, so their unease was minimal. That night, we made love, but it lacked the usual passion. Sensing my distress, Claire asked anxiously, "Is your stomach still bothering you, dear?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, but I can handle it." Desperately hoping she would choose our love and marriage over the upcoming trip, I asked, "Do you really need to go on this trip?" Deep down, I wished it were all just a nightmare that would vanish. She sighed and replied apologetically, "I'm sorry, honey, but this trip is necessary. I'll do my best to wrap things up and return home as soon as I can. I'm really looking forward to the weekend with all of you." With a heavy heart, I sighed and said, "Okay, honey, it's time to get some sleep. You have to get up early for your flight. I'll take a quick shower now so I won't have to worry about it in the morning." "Okay," I replied. While she stepped into the shower, an impulse led me to inspect her suitcase to see what she had packed. Though the clothes on top seemed businesslike, I was surprised to find, upon closer examination, a selection of her most seductive lingerie and a small black cocktail dress in which she always looked irresistible. Respecting her personal space, I carefully returned everything to its place, closed the suitcase, and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep that night, and when I heard Claire stirring around 5 in the morning, I remained in bed, choosing not to bid her farewell as was our custom. I felt a mix of weariness and sadness. Bending down to give me a kiss on the cheek before leaving, she inquired, "Still not feeling well, honey?" I simply nodded, struggling to express the turmoil within me. With the sound of the garage door closing, I finally got out of bed and made my way to the shower. I knew the day ahead would be filled with challenges. After seeing the kids off to school and having breakfast, I turned to the phone book to search for a private detective service in the yellow pages. My main criteria were to locate an agency with a nationwide presence, preferably in the city Claire was heading to. I reached out to several agencies and eventually found one with a branch in her destination area. I set up a meeting with them for the same morning, hoping they could provide the necessary information. Next on my agenda was finding a divorce attorney. A friend had recommended a specific lawyer, so I found his contact details and gave him a call. I arranged an appointment for the afternoon, hoping this lawyer could guide me through the challenging process we were about to face. When I arrived at the private investigator's office, I discussed my concerns and arranged for Claire to be surveilled on the evening she was away. I provided them with a photo of Claire and details of her travel route to aid in their identification. They assured me they would gather photos and compile a report on her activities as soon as her business day concluded. To ensure seamless communication, they agreed to send information via email to their Denton office and promised to provide a comprehensive report by Monday morning. Satisfied with their commitment, I made a substantial upfront payment as a prepayment for their services. They informed me they might not be able to capture photographs, but they would strive to provide as many incriminating photos as possible. I agreed that it would suffice. My afternoon meeting with the lawyer proceeded as anticipated. He explained that in our state, divorce follows a no-fault principle, meaning there's no need to assign blame. However, given that I am the primary caregiver for our children, it's likely I will be granted custody. It was crucial for me to understand that Claire would receive substantial visitation rights for our children. Furthermore, our property would be divided equally, with both sides getting an even split of 50%. Alimony wouldn't be necessary due to our similar incomes, but since I would have custody of the children, Claire would be obligated to pay child support. As for the inheritance she obtained, it held no significance to me, and she needed to retain it for herself. My top priority was the well-being of our children. I instructed the lawyer to prepare the necessary documents to be delivered to Claire on Monday, citing irreconcilable differences. I also asked her to agree to vacate our house immediately upon our divorce. The lawyer confirmed that as the children's guardian, I had the authority to make this request. It was decided that once the children reached 18, we would sell the house, and the proceeds would be divided between us. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of contentment, realizing that life would move forward for me and the children, while Claire would have to face the consequences of her betrayal. At that moment, I didn't take immediate action concerning our finances, insurance, or other legal matters. I assumed I'd have sufficient time to address these issues after serving her with divorce papers. Given her inheritance, I believed she wouldn't have to be concerned about her share of our joint savings. When it was time for school to conclude, I headed home to catch the bus. On Friday afternoon, when Claire returned, I kindly offered to take care of her laundry, but she politely declined, insisting she would handle it later. I couldn't help but grin, recognizing how playfully mischievous I had been. Deep down, I fully comprehended why she preferred to manage the laundry herself. It was crucial for her to keep her extramarital affairs concealed at all costs. Later, as we lay in bed, Claire expressed worry about my ongoing stomach issues and suggested I see a doctor. "This has been persisting for too long," she emphasized. I playfully responded to Claire, letting her know that I intended to try a new medication recommended by a friend to address my persistent stomach problems. I expressed optimism that this would resolve the issue and bring her back to me soon. When we embraced, she whispered that she missed me greatly. On Monday, as the kids left for school and Claire headed to work, I received a call from the detective agency informing me that they had a report ready. I told them I'd be there shortly, and within 30 minutes I was sitting down with the office manager discussing the details. The office manager informed me that a report with attached photos had been faxed from Denton that morning. He admitted he hadn't had time to read the entire report, but upon a quick scan and a glance at the photos, it seemed highly incriminating. I took a copy of the report and started reading its contents. The subject of the report was identified as Claire Barton. According to the report records, the surveillance of the woman began at 5:17 p.m. on Wednesday, June 16th, in the lobby of the Denton Marriott Hotel. Her identity was confirmed by comparing a photo obtained from the Merville office. Upon closer examination of the report, it turned out that she was wearing a company badge, further confirming her identity. Moreover, the report detailed the movements of the subject and noted she was carrying a briefcase when she entered the elevator. A staff member accompanied her and verified her arrival at room 414 at 5:23 p.m. It's important to note that the report emphasized that the subject was alone at that time. Additionally, the report included a photograph labeled Exhibit 1A, showing the subject dressed professionally before entering the room. When looking at the photo, it was clear she still wore rings. Evidently, the photo was taken discreetly using a mobile phone. The report stated that the agents had rented a room across from the subject's room. At 6:31 p.m., they received a signal that the subject had left her room and was heading for the elevator. A minute later, at 6:32 p.m., the subject exited the elevator and entered the lobby. The report noted she was dressed as described in Example 1 billion. Upon examining Example 1 billion, it became evident that Claire was wearing a small black cocktail dress paired with high-heeled shoes. She was also adorned with a necklace I had given her for our 10th anniversary celebration. However, what stood out the most was the absence of wedding rings on her left hand. The photo showed clearly that she wasn't wearing them. The report mentioned that the staff had rented a room across from hers. A minute later, at 6:32 p.m., the subject exited the elevator and entered the lobby. The report noted she was dressed as described in Example 1 billion. Upon examining Example 1 billion, it was clear that Claire was wearing a small black cocktail dress paired with high-heeled shoes. She was also adorned with a necklace I had given her for our 10th anniversary celebration. However, what stood out the most was the absence of wedding rings on her left hand. The photo clearly showed she wasn't wearing them. The photo, identified as Exhibit 1D, displays Claire and a man in a tight embrace, engaged in a passionate kiss while seated in a booth. The intensity of their connection was clearly visible in the picture. At 8:51 p.m., the report noted that both individuals left the restaurant. They then took the elevator and ascended to Claire's floor. Another photo, labeled Exhibit 1E, captures the moment when Claire and the man entered her room, specifically room 414. In this image, Claire appears slightly intoxicated but undeniably pleased with the evening's events. At 11:13 p.m., the man exited Claire's room and left the building. The report included the license plate number of a car registered to Alexander B. Tate, residing at 1424 Alia Drive in Denton. Notably, Alexander B. Tate was married and had 2 young children. As I delved further into the report's details, it became evident that Claire repeated her actions the following night with another man. The report bore the signature of an investigator from Denton. This revelation filled me with deep anxiety and resentment. It became clear that my wife was leading a promiscuous life while she was away from home. I couldn't come to terms with her actions. It was a betrayal that exceeded my worst expectations. Even the fact that Claire had lost her wedding rings didn't stop her from being careless. After settling the bill with the private detective, I thanked them and left. I made sure to take 2 additional copies of the report, which were recorded on a CD to keep them safe. Once I got back home, I wasted no time and immediately called my divorce attorney. I asked about the status of the divorce papers, and the attorney confirmed they were ready for filing. Without hesitation, I instructed them to initiate the filing process and specifically requested that the papers be served to her publicly at her workplace the following day. The attorney assured me that this could be done smoothly and asked for her workplace address, which I promptly provided. My intentions were clear. I aimed to humiliate her during the legal proceedings. Handing her the divorce papers at her workplace not only satisfied my desire for revenge, but also served as a form of justice for her actions. That night, there was no love between us. Claire seemed to sense that something was wrong, perhaps suspecting that I had discovered something unsettling. Though she didn't directly voice her concerns, she expressed hope for my quick recovery. Interestingly, she also appeared somewhat reserved, but I chose not to comment on it and simply ignored it. The next morning, I woke up early after a night of little sleep. I immersed myself in work on the computer until I heard the children waking up, and then I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. After the meal, I said goodbye to Claire when she left for work. She approached me for a hug and a kiss, but I responded with a half-playful embrace, encouraging her to leave quickly. At that moment, I sensed she might have had an inkling of what awaited her. As I closed the door behind her, tears welled up in her eyes and she whispered, "I love you." After her departure, profound sadness washed over me, and I felt an urge to release my tears. Yet, I quickly composed myself, as the children required my attention, and I needed to prepare them for the school bus. Around 10:45 a.m., the phone rang, disrupting our morning routine. Displaying Claire's workplace on the caller ID, I answered the call without uttering a word, and there was a brief pause as the caller realized I wasn't inclined to engage in conversation. In a trembling voice and a whisper, Claire said, "I'm sorry." Shortly after, the line fell silent, and I remained silent as well. Claire didn't return home that night, and I wondered if she continued her deceitful game, seemingly indifferent to her husband. While I recognized my anger was justified, I also considered that I might have been overly harsh on her. The children, disheartened by their mother's absence, wondered where she was. To uplift their spirits, I invited them to have dinner at a McDonald's cafe. By the time we returned home after dinner, the kids were exhausted and went straight to bed. The next morning, Claire called with a request. "Honey, can I come home and pack my things? Can we talk?" Initially, a sense of guilt welled up within me, but it quickly dissipated. I replied calmly, "Why don't you come between 9 and noon?" As I continued, "Then the kids and I won't be here." Regarding our conversation, I made it clear that I'd speak with her one-on-one in my lawyer's office, only after she signed, notarized, and returned the divorce documents. "Then I'll listen to whatever you have to say." There was a sob on the line before Claire answered, "Good." Shortly after, the phone fell silent again. She signed the divorce papers, and 6 months later, our marriage officially came to an end. It turned out that she became pregnant during the affair. Unfortunately, when she attempted to conceal it from her last lover, contraception failed. Considering it was near the childbearing age, even if I hadn't found out about her infidelity through the lost rings, the truth would probably have come out eventually. There were rumors that she had started dating again. If she ever gets close to getting married again, I've thought about honestly warning her future spouse about her unfaithfulness. It seems unnecessary for her to deceive and hurt another person. We had a meeting, and during our conversation in my lawyer's office, I shared my thoughts with her. She pleaded with me to reconsider the divorce decision. She talked about how difficult it was for her not to have unrestricted access to our children. However, I explained that I couldn't trust her anymore. Then, she mentioned that she had seen a psychologist who diagnosed her with nymphomania. She assured me that her impulses were now under control. Despite her explanations, I told her that it wasn't enough for me. Even if she claimed to have her urges in check, the fact that she hadn't sought help earlier indicated a lack of proactive effort on her part. If she had addressed her cravings from the beginning, she might not have found herself in the current situation. When I left the lawyer's office, she continued to cry. Having recently reconnected with a school friend who keeps me updated, I learned that he works at a nightclub. He mentioned seeing my ex-wife at the club where he works on several weekend nights. She frequents the club with different men and behaves provocatively. I was deeply hurt that my children have such an irresponsible mother. Perhaps my ex-wife never recovered from nymphomania. A friend of Claire's also called me and informed me that Claire was in poor health. She said my ex-wife needed my assistance because she had contracted herpes. Meanwhile, she continued her promiscuous lifestyle. I sympathized with her but conveyed that I couldn't offer any help, nor did I want to. Claire chose this lifestyle and its associated health issues. I began dating again, and it seems I found someone special. This woman, around my age and divorced herself, discovered her ex-husband's infidelity and didn't tolerate such behavior. She possesses strength and resilience, qualities I genuinely admire. It seems that my children also like her. I believe this is a natural progression, and it's only a matter of time before I consider taking our relationship to a new level.